Okay. Ooh, that's very loud. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March 11th meeting of the Network Advisory Council. I'd like to start with some introductions, and we will start with the NAC representatives in the room. I am Jody Moore from the Red Lodge Carnegie Library, current chair of the NAC, and we'll start with Susie. Oh, in the microphones, everybody, remember, press the button.
I'm Susie McIntyre. I'm from the Great Falls Public Library.
Mark Weatherington, Bitterroot Public Library in Hamilton.
Mitch Grady, Livingston Park County Public Library.
Peggy Taylor, Montana State Library Commission.
We also have some NAC members who join us online today. Jana, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Jana Underwood, Sheridan County Library. Nice to see you all.
And Erin.
Erin LaFramboise, Blackfeet Community College in Browning.
And Lori.
Lori Roberts, still in Public Library.
I think that's everyone with us in the meeting now. So let's go around. We did, Jana. Yep. Let's go around the room and meet our state library staff here. Jenny, would you begin?
Thanks, Jody. Jenny Stapp, the Montana State Librarian.
Rebecca Camp, the State Library Data Coordinator.
Jennifer Brunell, Montana History Portal Director. Bobby DeMontney, Lifelong Learning Librarian. Kara Orban, State Library. Tracy Cook, Lead Consulting and Learning Librarian.
Genevieve Lighthizer, Admin Specialist.
And then do we have some state library staff online as well?
We have Calais.
Good morning, everyone.
Pam.
Pam Henley, Consulting Librarian.
Suzanne.
Suzanne Reimer, Consulting Librarian.
Jim. Sharon.
Hi, Sharon Hardwick, State HR, State Library.
Okay, also in the room today, we have Bruce Newell with us. Bruce, would you introduce yourself?
So I have done. Bruce Newell from the Trust for Montana Libraries. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And we have some other guests online, Genevieve.
Monica.
Well, thank you to everyone for being here today. I just feel like we're going to end early today, so let's keep that positive energy going. Okay, at the start of our agenda, we have, as part of your packet, the final minutes from our May and August meetings. And we have an action item, which is the draft minutes from our meeting of November 8th, 2023. Any discussion on those minutes or edits needed? Hearing none.
I move that we accept the minutes.
She read my mind. Thank you, Susie. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second. This is Lori.
Thank you, Lori. All right, we have a motion to approve the November 8th draft of the minutes and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, I will take that as a unanimous passing of the motion. This takes us to our next item on the agenda, which is the Public Library Standards Roadmap. Is this a Tracy item? Take it away, Tracy.
All right, NAC members. This is, as the memo stated, with the redo of the public library standards, there is one administrative rule that attaches to what we call the Public Library Standards Roadmap. The roadmap itself is not an administrative rule. It is entirely voluntary. It was intended to just be a way for libraries to achieve a higher level of excellence, since the public library standards themselves are kind of like, this is the basic level of service we think every Montanan deserves, no matter where they live. So this was the first year of libraries using the roadmap that we have designed, and it is linked there in the memo. And the feedback that we got from libraries is it's actually a little bit clunky to use, and it was definitely written at a different time. And so with all of that feedback that I received from the libraries, I worked with all of the library development staff to create a new roadmap that is located at the end of this memo. When the task force met, we didn't talk about how we were going to update the roadmap. And so in chatting with Jenny and Kara, I decided it made the most sense to actually come to the NAC as the body representing libraries in Montana and share this draft with you and get your feedback. And then I will also share it with the State Library Commission in April as well. And the plan would be to bring it back to your May meeting for action. So today is just to get your thoughts on this, see if there's anything we're missing or anything you think we should change or delete.
I would just like to say thank you because the other roadmap was really hard. So I think this is much better.
Tracy, one thing I thought as I read through it is it's all nice, but it's all conceptual. There's no, like, it's kind of easy to read through those bullets and be like, I'm doing that. We're doing that. My board members be like, that looks good. We got it. Because there's never any, and I understand if this was an administrative rules, we really wouldn't want to put any specific numbers or figures in there. But the vagueness doesn't give people much to work towards, maybe, or allows them to be satisfied with what they currently have and what they currently do. It's really hard to put in numbers. I recognize when we have such a wide range in terms of population sizes and staff sizes and budgets. But yeah, particularly when it talks about being open convenient hours and as many hours as possible, that one really struck me as being vague, but also like without, I mean, being open at a time when no one's visiting the library or needing your services isn't necessarily utilizing your resources to the best potential. Are there any comments or questions from folks online?
This is Jonna. I just had a quick question. I was a little confused as to why it doesn't work well. If it was meant to just be an additional set of goals to aim for. Someone, I didn't catch it, somebody with you there in person had indicated that it was hard. So I'm just kind of curious what was hard about it or why it didn't work well.
That was Susie, and I, I am a little bit of an overachiever. So when it said in the standards that the board had to review the roadmap every year, I went into the roadmap and I created a Word document that showed whether we met or didn't meet each of the standards, and had my board review it. And that was 14 pages long. And the board thought that it was overwhelming. So what we're doing now is every single meeting, we have a different section of the roadmap that we go over. Because of all the different things that are happening in Great Falls, the excellent standards and the cooperative standards are actually causing a lot of controversy. Just by putting in the standard that we do a levy every 5 years, I had letters sent to my commission calling for my resignation because people were so upset. So, and I, you know, we're all on the knack for different reasons, and so my experience might not be the experience of all libraries, but being able to you know, if you really went through with your board each objective in the previous roadmap, it would take a really long time. I mean, for us to do it, we are spending 15 to 20 to 30 minutes every meeting looking at the roadmap, which seems like a lot of time. Does that answer your question, Jonna?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Susie.
Are there other comments online?
I agree, it's just a little vague. And this almost seems like a more of a performative piece of information rather than, I don't know, I feel like it's very vague. And so how do we know we're doing compared to other libraries in Montana, you know, what are the actual standards we're working for?
Another thing I had noticed, Tracy, was it doesn't really align with at least this year's Excellent Library Service Awards questions. And they're two different things, I suppose. It's MLA, ultimately, maybe that's acknowledging the ELSA libraries, but that's what we call excellent library service. And then this is like what it takes to be an excellent library. And it's not like they're in disagreement with each other, but they also don't align.
Yeah, so the excellent, we intentionally separated the Excellent Library Service Award and the Public Library Standards. And that was done because we had non-public libraries who wanted to go for the ELSA. So that is intentional. But what I'm hearing, I think, from the group is this is too vague and it's not really excellence. Is that fair?
Can you bring up the actual roadmap in the memo? Yeah. I'm not sure if the measures in the roadmap address some of the concerns that you're expressing. Because there are quite a few actual measures in this roadmap. And I want to be very clear that, you know, we were intentional in not putting the roadmap in rules because it's not a standard. The standards are in rules. Those, as Tracy said, are the basic level of service that all libraries need to meet in order to qualify for state funds. But we also recognized, and those of you who will recall the previous standards that were in rule, there were these means by which libraries could continue to develop their services. And that's one of the things that's really important for the state library and our consulting work with libraries is that we have ways to ensure that libraries can continue to find ways to ensure that their library services are improving and reflective of their communities. So this idea of a roadmap, or we've also used the language of a maturity model, is intended to give some direction for libraries in order to achieve that, to say, you know, we're not going to settle for just the basic level of services, even though that's all that's required of us. We are ourselves going to strive for continued excellence. So I think it's really important for us to know if we haven't captured what that excellence might look like. I think that that's critical. And then from there, making sure that the roadmap or the model that's in place helps libraries to achieve that. I think there is actually quite a bit of measurable accountability in the document. I think one of the questions I'm hearing is accountable to whom? You know, the standards are something through which libraries should be accountable to themselves, but really are actually accountable to the state in the form of the state funds. The roadmap really makes libraries accountable to themselves, and our staff is here to help support and guide libraries to achieve excellence in whatever form that looks like. You know, I appreciate what Susie said about meeting with the library boards, and I would think that that would be part of the process each year, looking at the roadmap, determining for yourselves what that accountability looks like for individual libraries. Our consultants are going to be asking, you know, what are you striving to achieve under the umbrella of the roadmap, and how can we help? But it isn't intended to be prescriptive in the way that the standards are intended to be prescriptive.
And I would share that the difference in the size of libraries and where they're at makes this actually an extremely hard document to create. I mean, we find that with the Excellent Library Service Award. I mean, what a tiny part-time one-person library does versus Missoula is very different. And so I think that is truly one of the struggles I found with this roadmap when I was trying to create it. And I think that's probably why it is vague, because it's going to look different if it's Cascade versus Billings. So, um, did you have something, Mark?
Yeah, I think what sort of helped me understand this roadmap and be, you know, largely okay with how it is. There's some little like kind of nitpicky things that, you know, aren't really worth talking about, but just generally, I think the roadmap is almost more kind of culture driven. It's more about creating a culture of excellence and sort of almost some of these more, not necessarily emotional, but more kind of like feeling oriented cultural things of what an excellent library feels like, sort of, you know, when you just look at some of the verbiage here, some of the descriptions, some of the ideas, language, concepts. Whereas the standards themselves are very concrete, very binary, very metric. You know, you either do or you don't. You're either open 50 hours a week or you're not. You know, you can certainly be open 48 hours a week and trying to meet all these kind of cultural things. And I think eventually that'll coalesce and move you towards the standards. I think this is sort of the way I sort of interpreted it. And I don't know if it was how it was supposed to be, but it's more of trying to just get people, staff, boards, directors, as well as, you know, local government, depending on how they're involved in just sort of the ideas and concepts, which I think bubble up to excellence, whatever size your library is. And I think, you know, working backwards, I think there's probably very few libraries that meet the standards that don't meet most of the ideas in this roadmap. And for me, that makes it seem, you know, just okay, or not okay. It makes it seem fine and sufficient to meet those ends, because that's what this is supposed to do, is to try to lift people up and get them to meet those excellent standards. And I think it was when I first started going kind of bullet by bullet, paragraph by paragraph, I was kind of struggling with it and having some of the same issues that other people had. And then when I realized that, oh, this is more of just sort of a guidance and overarching way to encourage people to view things through a lens that'll help them meet the standards rather than an actual. And I don't know if maybe the word roadmap is a little confusing, because that makes it seem, you know, go, you know, get on the interstate, go to exit 15, take, you know, 10 miles, turn left here, go there. So I think I think some of that language might be, you know, could be changed, but
We're stuck with roadmap though, in
Oh,
the
okay.
administrative rules that
Oh,
that is the specific phrase used. But this did, yeah, this struck me as an excellent library manifesto. You know, like these are the things we are going to dedicate ourselves to doing more so than a roadmap. But that is I did just look in the standards and that is the language used there. So it's sort of stuck.
If we
And
could
then just to clarify, Jenny, because you were referencing this old one, this new one is going to do away with this. Like this one will no longer exist.
This is the one that's going away. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Bruce.
I have a question. From an advocacy point of view, I wonder what would happen if instead of a roadmap per se, if you had, if you switch this roadmap is from a librarian or perhaps a board's point of view. It's kind of inside baseball. I wonder if there is a simple set of standards or expectations that any member of the public would have about their public library that would define the equivalent of this. And the reason this comes to mind is because there's talk about asking for funding the resource sharing statute this coming legislative session. And if public expectations if public expectations did not drive that, then we were in trouble, right? But then what are those reasonable public expectations? Just a question. I'm certainly going to think about it.
Alyssa.
Good morning. Yes. My sort of question that leads into a comment, and I apologize if this was covered. I'm still on my first cup of coffee. But where exactly is this intended to exist? I know it says someone mentioned like it being somewhat linked. I mean, not the public standards, but somewhat linked to the public standards. But is it going to be, say, included as part of the trustee manual or director handbook? And just where I'm getting at is if it's, I mean, I think that everything in there is great and it's all information that we should have. My concern is if it's one more thing we have to look at, one more thing we have to take into consideration, one more thing that us as directors and boards have to look at, then I don't think it will necessarily be, it may not be as effective as we think it will be. I know for me right now, this, throwing this onto my plate would be hard.
And then to clarify that, Alyssa, in the first section of our public library standards, number 12 is the board and director review the most current public library standards roadmap maintained by the Montana State Library. So in following our standards, this is a document we should be referencing once a year. And then it's not part of the standards or the administrative rules of Montana, which means, as Tracy said, it can change over time. So it's possible that every year when we sit down with our board to review this, that it's an updated document. Right now, we have a more complex roadmap that sets out essential versus excellent versus cooperative standards. And it sounds like some libraries found that overwhelming and not as helpful as they wanted it to be, or more work than they were prepared for. So this new version is designed to maybe be more usable by libraries. But obviously, I think in the discussion today, we have some concerns that it's still not going to work as well as we want it to, or going to function the way we want it to. Susie.
So I'm just curious, have other libraries reviewed the roadmap that's up with their boards, and what was their board feedback?
Susie, mine did. This is Lori. So what I do is I have this in front of their trustee manual when they become new board members, and then we go through it. But what I do is I basically put the document in one of our board meeting minutes, and I ask them to go through it and let me know what they think and stuff like that. And especially my new board members, they found it as a good guide in what their expectations are as a board member. And so they do like the current one because it's a little more definitive, and it worked well with them just going through it on their own and then writing questions, and then we discussed it.
Yes, Rebecca.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in and just say, when you said manifesto, that like, oh yeah, okay. So in a roadmap, like from a technical perspective, you know, what you're looking at is a path forward. And I think you lose that in the new document. You don't have the incremental that you have in the existing roadmap, where you have the side by side and how you can move forward over time towards reaching cooperative or excellent.
And Susie, at my library, like I like to go through and block like, oh, these are things we're already doing, yay. And these are things that are not within our control. And these are things that we could work towards. And I also, as do I think many of us in this profession, struggle with perfectionism. So I really appreciate that. I probably live more in the like, we can do what we can do with what we have and, you know, what's available to us. And then one thing I've noticed as my time in my library has grown longer is like some goals I had 15 years ago, I finally hit, you know, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So I've learned that it's a long game and I'm willing to say like, well, we're not accomplishing that one this year, but let's have that in our heads. So, did it cause me to strive towards more excellence? I'm not sure that it did that, but we did look at it.
And I think I would share some of the feedback from the other libraries that I heard. Some of them also experienced Susie. It created controversy that was fairly exhausting given their current circumstances. And then the other thing I heard was not everybody is into spreadsheets. Sorry, Colette, and Rebecca. And so I think for some librarians, when I would sit down with them in their boards, I could see that they were like, I get what you're trying to do, but there's something about this format that I get hung up on. And so one of the things we had talked about at this library development staff is making like a fun little form where there are levels that people would choose. And if they chose like an essential standard and said they don't meet that, then we would follow up with them and be like, that's a problem. And if they chose a mid-range or a higher level standard, we would follow up with them and be like, do you need any assistance getting there? One observation I have though is that still, when I just kind of did a mock-up, still creates a pretty intense, lengthy document. And I kind of hear what Alyssa's saying, and I hear it from a lot of library directors. It's just like, given what's going on right now, there's exhaustion in our profession right now. And so doesn't mean we should stop striving for excellence. I just wonder if it means we need to dial back. And since this is a living document, like, should I dial it way back and just maybe try what Bruce said, kind of flip the script and write it from the patron's perspective and only have a few things and see what happens? I don't know. That's one thought.
I'd be curious what your thoughts are in terms of the priorities of it. You know, I assume this, of course, wasn't listed in order of importance for these, but I wonder if for the libraries that might be, you know, if it might help for them to see it as sort of a priority kind of thing, which I think it would be almost impossible to prioritize these because, you know, as a healthy and supportive workplace, if it's not well funded, what are you really accomplishing there? You know, so, but yeah. The other thought I had too was that it's interesting to approach it from the perspective of the public. But what I've found in my just observations and looking at, you know, even our data and, you know, anecdotes for the public is there are a lot of single issue library users out there. You know, there's some people where if all we were was a place for hotspots, like basically a hotspot pickup drop off, didn't have books, didn't have public access computers, didn't have story time, like they're fine, their needs are met, they really couldn't care less. And there's a lot of people that come to story time that, you know, maybe check out a few books, but the parents don't use the library at all. They might not even have a library card, and that's, you know, yeah, no, yeah, but interesting how there are so many single issue library users. You know, there's somebody that come in and just use our public computers, you know, never check anything out, never take anything home. So it's interesting trying to figure out how, yeah, you sort of wrap all that up into what the community really needs, which I think most libraries by and large do a good job of. And I think, you know, conceptually, I do like the ideas encompassed in this, but I do wonder if some of the formatting is causing people to get hung up, if maybe having some more sort of priorities and pathways that are a little more linear could be helpful. So yeah, I think all the ingredients are there, but I'm not sure if we have the kind of thing ready to put in or take out of the oven, so to speak.
Well, and I think too, partially it was really hard to prioritize because if it's truly for each library to decide, there may be an area they need to work on or want to work on that another library isn't going to focus on. The other thing I've kind of pondered is, for me, when I think about those of you who really are truly achieving excellence, it is actually, as Bruce says, patron focused, but it's like, well, it's like Jody working with early childhood and early literacy so that kids in her community enter school ready for school and ready to read. Or it's another library that's working with older adults because they have an older population and those people are experiencing connection and learning and all of that. And so, but the thing is, that's very concrete, like children ready to read, bringing people together in a way, and in a way it's not. And what that looks like at each library is still different. And I think that is my struggle, to go back to you, Rebecca. I agree that the intent was it's like, how do we get from here, the basic standards, to the next step? But the answer to that, and this may be where me being a consultant is a blind spot, is it depends on that individual library. And that's what's hard for me.
I think in a roadmap, there could certainly be a spot for like a dotted box, but maybe it's in the instructions too, in your trustee manual of one bite at a time. Like you don't have to tackle all this at once, but maybe you choose one to focus on and then, yeah.
I think that's a really important point. Few things I wanted to say. I love that setting on my phone where I'm asking for directions and it tells me, do you want to take the shortest route? Do you want to avoid highways? Do you want to avoid toll roads? Road maps are not linear. Highway maps are not linear. And I think we need to recognize that and embrace that as part of our culture. I would be very resistant to any idea of undermining our definition of excellence because of the challenges that libraries are currently facing. It makes our job that much harder, 100% true. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be striving for, we shouldn't be trying to, I even hesitate to use the word definition, but give some voice and some language to what excellence looks like. And understand that we are all in this together to help one another, and certainly the staff of the State Library are here to help as well. So I think we need to work hard to make the tools as user-friendly as possible, to make sure that patrons' voices are reflected in the tools. We know that people view tools differently. They want more data, they want less data, they want more human stories, they want more examples, they want less, they like spreadsheets, they don't. We can do our best to provide tools in ways that will meet most people's needs, but we're never going to meet anybody's needs. So let's not get hung up on the tools. They're just tools and they don't define what excellence is. And then, so coming back to my question originally, do we feel like we're capturing what excellent libraries look like or not? If we're not, then let's spend time focusing on that. And then we can think about how can we make this roadmap as user-friendly and understandable as possible, and give each other grace to know that where people are on that path or on that roadmap is going to be very different. And we're going to go forward and backward a lot, given the circumstances that we're in, and that's okay.
I also cannot feel good about giving up on any dreams of excellence or giving libraries aspirations towards excellence and just being complacent and saying it's really hard right now. This is the best we can do. Just relax and get through it. I don't think that's the answer to anything. I liked what Bruce brought up about switching around the way we're thinking about it to the patron side. And I love anything that like, oh, in doing this, I can also accomplish this. So when Bruce made that comment, I was like, well, what if we could turn it around for this year? Because apparently we can change this every year, right? And what if in this year it was like helping drive us towards a survey, which is also completing like another standard, doing some sort of community survey or patron survey and understanding excellence through that lens for this year. Or then I was thinking about what if you took some examples of libraries around Montana and it was more just like an inspiration roadmap of look what this library did, this program, and could you do a program like that too? And or what's something that energized you in your library this year that you'd like to recommend that another library does? And I don't know, just completely rethink how we're doing this to bring out so that instead of the fatigue that Alyssa would feel when she pulled up this document or the concern that Susie would feel that this is actually going to upset my taxpayers who are already at a heightened state, that instead we'd be like inspiring our boards and our library directors to think like, oh, I could do this. I could try this. Maybe I'll get a new idea out of this. I don't know.
I really like that idea. of Having inspirational, like, and maybe for each one, thoughtful education and recruitment. Here's some things. And then here's an example of a library that did this and the steps that they took to do it.
I'm envisioning a web page that actually has the little Montana highway map that has our little vignettes of stories all across it, right?
Were we supposed to have some sort of tour of the libraries? What was that? It was being presented at Federations a couple of years ago.
Oh, the library passport.
A library
Mhm,
passport.
mhm.
Yeah, so it would be a variation of that. There would
Yeah.
be a little map and
Yeah.
you could
Mhm.
see what's going on.
Yeah.
I think it would be scalable because you could see what big libraries are doing, but also what small libraries are doing.
And I think if we did that, almost not to, but for this spreadsheet that we're looking at up here, whatever this document sort of morphs into that builds on that, I wonder if having examples of what, small, medium, and large libraries did to meet these might be helpful for people to look at. And especially, I find that's really helpful for libraries like the size of Bitterroot, where we're of course not as big as Great Falls or Missoula, but we're also, we're sort of unique, serving, 27,000 people or so. So we can both look to the smaller ones and the much bigger ones, as well as the ones in our peer group for inspiration. I know there's other libraries that are sort of similar size or demographics to where it'd be helpful to really see examples of what that looks like at other libraries.
Tracy, we gave you more work to do before May. Have you gotten things from this conversation that have given you what you need to work on that?
Yes.
Do you have any more questions for this group before we move on in the agenda? No. Any
I
other
think we-
comments online on this agenda item? Oh, Alyssa?
Yes, just me. I guess at first when I saw this, I just felt incredibly overwhelmed and just wanted to sit in a corner and cry. But as I'm kind of sitting here more and more with it, I mean, just an idea, Tracy, for you to consider is as I'm sitting here and looking at it, I think like how I would probably use this is, like like if I'm onboarding a new trustee, because I am looking for a new one, like, and they did not want to sit and read the whole trustee manual, right? Because it's 100 pages. Like my goal would be, if you read nothing else, read these 5 pages, right? Because these are the essential functions of your position. And then as they get deeper into it, you know, they can go further into the manual to get more information. And I guess maybe if it's approached in that way, that, you know, this is, you know, what am I gonna say? Like the essential things that the board needs to be working on, you know, that maybe sort of approaching it in that way may be a little less overwhelming. And going back to, you know, if you feel like you're falling short in one area, then, you know, then just kind of chunk it out into the stuff that you want to work on, and then that way, you know, the stuff that you are comfortable with, you know, where you're at, then you can just leave those alone, if that makes sense. I was kind of rambling, I apologize.
Thanks, Alyssa. Jonna?
So this is just real quick, but I did kind of like the idea that was discussed just a few moments ago about having some examples from the different sized libraries. Because when I look at the roadmap, there are actually a couple of things that, you know, my library does have that's in the excellent column. But there's some things here that, yeah, we're not going to get to just because of, you know, the limitations you have of being a smaller library. So it would be great to know, what are some of the other smaller libraries doing in reaching excellence, examples of what they did, how they went about it. So yeah, I kind of like that idea. So Tracy, you just do that. Okay. Go for it.
I just want to set expectations. I think we should bring another draft back in at your next meeting and not bring something to the commission yet. It sounds like we need some time.
And we have that time because I'm assuming as we do our standards this year, we'll be using this, the current roadmap, and that this new document would apply to the following fiscal year. Okay. Any other comments in the room or online before we move on?
You just reminded me, Jody, that with the standards process coming up in the next few months, maybe we should actually give ourselves a little bit more time and use the standards collection process to collect some stories about what libraries are doing and to get some feedback about the current roadmap.
The next item on our agenda is the library development plan update and the LSTA 5-year plan. And I'm guessing this is Kara. Give Kara a microphone, folks.
Doing a microphone timeshare over here. Okay, we have a few different ways that we track our work, and one of our plans is tied to our Library Services and Technology Act funding. That's our federal funding. As you know, we have a 5-year plan that we submit to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we have 5 years to try to achieve these high-level goals using our federal funds. Then we have our library development plan, which by and large is funded with LSTA, but not always entirely funded with the LSTA. So it's kind of a Venn diagram situation. So we have the spreadsheet, which we've crosswalked our current fiscal year library development projects to our current where we currently are with the LSTA plan. We've just started the new 5-year plan. And this is intended to give you a sense of where we are with our goals for this fiscal year and where those goals fall within our larger 5-year plan for meeting our LSTA goals. And that spreadsheet is the spreadsheet which Genevieve emailed to you. Do we have a copy of that available to look at? Yes, so this breaks it out more or less by project, which staff are responsible, specifically what we are doing to try to achieve these outcomes, and then where they fall under the current year library development goals. And then you can see we have a projected timeline of what we hope to achieve in the 5 years of our LSTA plan. So the purpose for sharing this with you today is to give you an update on where we are with our current fiscal year goals, and also to highlight which items have been completed, which items have not been completed or on hold, and to indicate whether this may not be something we're able to work on, either because it's not relevant, or we don't have the capacity to do it right now, or we decided it's not appropriate for us to work on right now. And possibly to identify some funding priorities for next fiscal year, which we'll be discussing later in the agenda. We also have a couple of specific items that we were going to discuss under this agenda item. Do you have any questions about this spreadsheet and the goals that we have listed here?
Kara, I was struggling to find for the yellow items when it says which items are on hold and why, and is it a capacity issue or something that another organization should work on? Like I couldn't figure out where that information came in on this spreadsheet or on the dashboard. Could you help me understand that?
Do you mean like why they're in yellow?
Yes,
yeah.
it says like on number 3 on the memo, it makes it sound like perhaps these questions are answered, why they're on hold,
Oh, yeah,
and I couldn't see the why.
you're right.
Or
It's
like
not.
this, like if it is something that should go to MLA, I couldn't see that, but maybe that was not intended to be on the spreadsheet.
We can definitely add that. I think it was probably more intended as a discussion point if needed. That was really because there's a variety of different reasons. I mean, the economic development one, for instance, it's in yellow because that was deprioritized by the NAC. You just said that was, and the libraries too, that was an area. And then the others are, I think, mostly capacity issues. There's a lack of staff capacity to really pull that off. I think that is actually primarily all of them. And then really the new director mentorship, kudos to Alyssa Ramirez, because I think she's addressing that through the MLA Public Library Director Interest Group. So that's probably the only one that was MLA, the rest are capacity. The other thing I would share, and I guess I would like some feedback from the NAC on this, is we had a library development plan update document that we would give you. And what staff were noticing is it felt very duplicative to the MSL work plan dashboard, which is linked in that memo. The MSL work plan dashboard is what our current projects are. And I just wondered if you are okay with us just using that, and that's your reference point for where we are with different milestones in those LD goals. Because that would save staff a little bit of time if we didn't have to create a separate library development update document for you. I'm seeing nodding heads in the room. How about those of you online?
Totally agree. This is Jonna. I had confusion going back and forth between the dashboard and the spreadsheet and looking at everything on the spreadsheet and trying to find it on the dashboard. It was confusing for me, but you know, I don't live in it, like you guys do. So just the one for me would be great.
And I feel really dumb asking this question, but when we say 23 to 27, we're talking about fiscal year 2023. Federal fiscal year. So we're in year 2, is that right? Like, I'm sorry, it is.
No, welcome to our world. I'm gonna let Kara take that.
Yeah, and there's an added confusion on how we've, at the state, have decided to spend our funds. So we just started spending LSTA 2023 in July. So we are in year 1. We try to align it with our state fiscal year. So when it's LSTA 23, we're actually in state fiscal year 24, but we're spending one award at a time.
In one federal fiscal year.
I understand this now. By the next meeting, when we're reviewing this, I will not. Could we put like a footnote or something so that I can, because every time I'm like, oh, there's weird stuff. Is it federal? Like, blah, blah. So just so I don't spend so much time wondering what's going on. Well, when I'm looking at, should we be looking at year 1 or year 2?
No, that's a great question, Susie. What I heard Jonna say is that she would be okay with just seeing the MSL work plan dashboard and the program dashboards. What I will say, and Kara and Rebecca, you should weigh in too, is that Kara, Rebecca, and I want to make sure that we are also working towards the LSTA goals, because that's what we told IMLS we would do. And so once a year, it is very useful to bring those goals to the NAC to kind of decide priorities and what that looks like. And so I guess the way I'm envisioning this, and maybe I'll just check my understanding is, so what we submit to IMLS is our LSTA goals. That's how we're going to use our federal funds. And what the LD work plan is in this year, this is what we are doing to work towards that goal. And then the work plan dashboard is showing our progress in working towards that year 1 goal, year 2 goal, and so forth. So it's really that you just need to know on that 1 year when we're adopting the library development plan or working on it, what year we're in federally funded wise and what goals we're working towards and what that looks like. Does that make sense? That's my thinking on it, but Kara, Rebecca, please.
Yeah, and that sparked something for me of maybe there would be a place for a 5-year dash that can look at our work. You know, once we finish year 1, we still want to know that that's something we did and then moving forward. Yeah.
I think Rebecca has this. Yeah.
Okay. So underneath this item is one of the projects we were working on this year for the 5-year plan, which was the staffing and salary study. The NAC had set that as one of their goals. And so in the 2023 collection for the public library survey, we included questions regarding library staffing and compensation. And I've presented a draft study for your review. And I wanted to call out some of the highlights that I found in that report, and you may have found others. But in the memo, I've called these out as well. It was interesting to me to see that in 83% of our smallest libraries, they're operated by less than 2 FTE, which has serious implications for how many hours a library can be open and the convenience of access to the public. compensation for the library director role has a very wide range in the state, all the way from minimum wage up to $78 an hour. The median is $22.61. The most interesting thing to me, though, is that only 8% of our directors are being compensated at or above the median rate for management positions, which is $40 an hour as of the latest OEWS research estimates for Montana. So that would be comparing directors to other management positions that have very similar responsibilities. Excuse me. So some libraries require library director qualifications beyond that certification that's required in ARM. But most libraries require only a high school diploma or bachelor's degree. And some of the annotations I saw in the survey indicate that this is shifting since the change in the rules.
And that's shifting in an unfortunate direction.
Yes. Yep. Towards having less requirement. Montana Public Library directors have an impressive level of experience. I believe the longest serving director is at 39 years. But across all the different population bands, we're looking at an average of 10 years of experience. So even in our smallest libraries, all the way up to our big libraries, we have very experienced professionals in our libraries. Only 20% of libraries benefit from leadership from an assistant director, and this has implications for succession planning as well as continuity of service. As some of those long tenured staff are looking at retirement, what's the plan for who's going to take over, especially in our small communities where there may only be less than 2 FTE total. Other than the director, the most popular position in the state is the library assistant role. By the definition, this was a paraprofessional role, and the median wage was $16.35 and most commonly required a high school diploma. And this one was really interesting to me as well. And it also kind of plays out with what we've been hearing about technology needs in our libraries. Only 8 libraries in Montana hire IT staff. That's mainly the largest libraries, but that does influence what kind of technology training libraries can offer, as well as support to the public and some of the patterns that we see at the state library. For example, when we're asking about Wi-Fi counts, that's a challenging thing for staff to get if they don't have IT staff that know how to access that information from their routers. And I had our state HR also review this, and one thing that she brought up that I'm going to add to this report is information about volunteer staff hours as well, because I think that does play an important role in our smallest libraries. But I had a few questions for you. The first of which is, if we were to conduct a follow-up study, what additional information do you think would be useful to help us achieve the stated outcomes for this project? Was there anything missing that you would want to know more about?
I'm not actually going to suggest that you do this because I think it would be a lot of work. But one of the things that has come up in Great Falls is a lot of cross comparison because we're hiring. So when we put out to hire an assistant library director, there was a lot of, oh my gosh, how can you be spending that much on an assistant library director when a brand new engineer, 21 years old out of Bozeman, makes the same amount? And like, we're hiring for lieutenants and captains at the police department that are making significantly more than the library director. And I wonder if other city departments see as much difference. Like, do chiefs of police across Montana have as big a range of, like at the big places they're making a lot, and at the little place, because the range of what directors are making is quite significant. And I wonder if that's true, when you look at planning and community development and public works. And is that a function of libraries, or is that just a function of city towns and, how they compare to what other people are doing? But I feel like that would be a next year or a several years down the road sort of thing. But I think this is really good work and it's really great info, but it made me wonder about that piece.
Yeah, that's a really great comment. And the League of Cities and Towns also administers a survey. And so some of that data is available. to look at.
I was thinking that just trying to get at benefits maybe, because benefits do add a lot of value to somebody's earnings, compensation, I guess is the way to say that. And then I'd be curious how many of the folks were involved with a union. And then I know like one of the things that benefits me as somebody who's been in my position for a very long time is being on a pay matrix that includes longevity increases, makes, you know, my rate of pay much higher than if someone were to come in and start in my position tomorrow. So like when we look at the extreme high, an extreme low, does that correlate with folks who just started or folks who've been in their libraries for a long, long, long time? I think it's really interesting data. A lot of it's really sad to me.
Which kind of brings up the next question. Does this spark any ideas for you on how we could provide better support for libraries? Bruce just asked, what's a living wage in Montana? And that is a tricky number to track down because it kind of depends on how you're looking at it. And, you know, I asked around the state and there isn't, in some states, they have that defined really clearly on what a living wage is, but there isn't something like that right now in Montana that I could track down.
I think this is Jonna. I think one thing that's kind of challenging a little bit, I had a salary adjustment discussion with my commission last year. And, you know, they wanted to know how, you know, how other librarians, you know, rank. And it was really hard to talk to them about that because, you know, each county, each government is different too. And each county, each government has different, the ability to pay people differently. The county next to us is not going to be paying the same salaries that our county does. And it's almost in some ways like comparing not even oranges to oranges with regard to salary amongst the different, you know, counties. And so that was a little challenging. It was also a little challenging, I found, with my commission, that they were just kind of looking at the baseline, but not taking into consideration the fact that, you know, maybe I've been a, you know, department head for 10 years, but I'm still getting paid less than an employee. And that happens here a lot, which, you know, I didn't quite understand that. So I think sometimes maybe county government, and maybe it's different for other county governments, they're not seeing a broader view of like how salary should or could be determined. That's just from my own experience. I don't know if anybody else has kind of experienced that, but just a comment there.
Jonah, do you think it would be helpful to have a comparison metric that would look at, this might be a little tricky because of the nature of library governance and funding in the state, but like a comparison of the percent of total library funding as a measure of the total county funding, for example, across the state. So libraries can know, you know, they're taking into account that total revenue that a county or a city county has as and then what percentage of that goes to library services.
Yeah, that might be a little helpful, at least to just give a broader
Context to the salary
yes.
discussion itself.
Yeah, that might be useful.
I'm not sure. There's some nuances there that might be tricky to figure out, but we can try.
And maybe a per capita like how many people you are serving. Cause like in Great Falls, it's in Cascade County, it would be really tricky to do that because we have 3 independent libraries and so the county municipal, that, yeah, that's super hard.
Big buckets though might be a start.
I was curious, Rebecca, if there was any way, or if you just had any sort of intuition about cross-referencing the salaries and wages at libraries with those that achieve the excellent library standards, and just sort of seeing if there's any, overlap, or yeah, just seeing, yeah.
That's not something I looked at, but that would be really interesting. And there's also other kind of output performative things that we collect that we can compare, like, you know, is your circulation higher because you have more investment in your staff, or programs might be a better example, because you can pay into having more staff, then you can deliver more. So yeah, there's some different things we could look at there.
Yeah, because I think it'd be just sort of interesting to know what the lowest, or yeah, just how levels of funding influence, the correlation doesn't equal causation exactly, but I think to just see, how many libraries that are in the upper, tier of funding are able to meet the excellent library standards, and how many in that lower tier, and if there's anything to be gleaned from that.
I'd like to know what percentage of a library's total operating budget goes to wages. If it's comparable, if it's all a direct measure of the least paid employees are dealing with the smallest total budgets.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see if, the ones that have the lowest pay might be spending much more on collection materials or technology or just basic utilities.
Or they might just have that small of an operating budget.
Yeah.
And so that's all they can afford. Yes, Bruce?
So the thing is, it's, the state library really does need to hire an economist. But if you go by some sort of measure of sufficiency of our patrons receiving sufficient services, there are certain fixed costs to providing those services that favor big populations in terms of the per capita cost. So it can't be a single figure. It has to be a sliding scale. It's a lot less expensive for Gallatin County or Yellowstone County, for instance, Missoula County, to provide services than it is Stillwater County, because the fixed costs are absorbed over a larger population.
Yeah.
So it ain't simple, but it's very interesting.
Alyssa?
Yeah, one thing that I thought might be interesting, and maybe it could just be measured in terms of uh total like total personnel budget, but maybe a comparison between city versus city county libraries. Um, my guess is that the funding available to the various types of governances that are in the library, like maybe that would have some sort of uh be somewhat telling, right? Because I think that, it would help kind of give context to the various revenues and budgets that we're all experiencing.
So some places that we've brainstormed that we would like to share this with include Mako and the League. What are some other places that you think would be useful to share this study?
I just keep thinking that phrase, do no harm. And like, let's not create any document that could potentially be harmful to a library. So I would love to think that no one's going to look at that range and say, oh, I could be paying you a lot less. So like, how do we set a scenario so that people looking at this document are instead encouraged to think, I should be doing better. I should be reaching further out, not saying you're clearly overpaid. And I don't have the answer. I I think in today's climate, we do have to be cautious.
Would it make sense to include some of these comparative measures, contextual measures in the report before it goes out?
Can we also compare what the average fast food joint across the state is paying? Cause
Mhm.
I'm looking at that $9.95 for a library director.
Mhm.
You can go to work just about anywhere and make more than that.
Like
and
double
that's-
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of sad.
On that note, I do have a 17-year-old in my life, well, last year, 17, and was bringing in 19 an hour at Panda Express. So just to put that in perspective.
Yeah, I think that's important to go back to the excellent library standards then too, to say, if we're only paying this, are we really meeting a standard when we can know that person could go to work at another establishment, different line of work entirely, often no education requirements necessary, and make that much more.
We've got a lot of folks wanting to comment on this one. So I'm going to call on people. Susie, I saw you reaching for your mic first, I think.
I think it's really important when we frame this, often librarians are seen as heroic and we have like the superhero standard, and we're also called upon to sacrifice for the community. And we actually have people using those words in Great Falls that we need to sacrifice for the good of the city in terms of our budget. And so some sort of recognition of that, we deserve to be well compensated and we are not being greedy. We've been accused of being greedy a lot, and other professions who say, an engineer deserves to be paid this much because they've done these things. So some sort of context around the education and skills required to do the pieces versus the education and skills required to do the fast food type of thing. I think something like that might be helpful. But mostly that's just an observation.
Regarding the education piece, I think that might be challenging because what I'm seeing is most of these positions only do require a high school diploma.
And then Carly online has her hands raised. Okay, I think Carly has done a comment. Please raise the issue of educating decision makers about the actual job of librarians as opposed to what they think we do, sit at the desk and check out books and read books. And I think comparing across disciplines is very powerful. Thanks. Thank you, Carly. Okay, now Tracy.
Ditto to what Carly just said. I think you have to talk about department head to department head. The other piece that makes me a little hesitant about the excellent library standards is I don't know that that's necessarily going to be a correlation, because I know a lot of library directors who do sacrifice and they volunteer their time and they achieve excellence and they're not paid fairly, but they care so deeply about their community that they're going to do that anyway. So I don't know that that would necessarily be a good measure. That's my only hesitation with that.
And I would be a lucky person who's representing the highest hourly rate in my population category, but also has a position description that does require a master's in library science. So it is probably worth noting when you have something like that that is causing the perhaps causing it to be bumped higher. I don't know if that helps. Are there more comments from folks online, either in the chat or who would like to speak?
And for those of you who are online, I'm now sitting at Genevieve's computer, so feel free to raise your hand or post in the chat. It appears to be all.
I do want to say, Rebecca, I'm so glad you asked the questions in the collection in the statistics and put together this document. I mean, it's very interesting. Like I said, I want to cry at certain pieces of it because we can do better than this and we have to do better than this. And yeah, my only worry is may people not use this to somehow lead to negative outcomes. I had someone on our city council last year seem to get the idea that I was the highest paid librarian in the state, which this could show them that I'm not, which I knew I wasn't. But yeah, I'm just trying to think like, what are the ways we could avoid somebody interpreting this in a way that could be harmful to library staff?
I was going to say for a follow-up question, sorry, because that sounded like a conclusion. So now this is a postscript. That a follow-up question might be, you talk about the director had 39 years experience. I know I'm assuming that wasn't one library, but to find out about retention rates, like at all these positions, how long do people stayed at them historically?
Thanks, everyone. That was very helpful. And I think we'll definitely consider very carefully about what you said, Jody, about doing no harm and what additional context we can provide, and maybe considering the audience and, you know, a different edition of this and how we phrase things. So thank you.
The one other thing I noticed when reading through is in a smaller library like mine, somebody with the title library assistant, is that what it is going to do a lot more work than that position is going to do in a larger library. And I didn't know if there's a better way than to tier these job titles rather than relying on title, something that could reflect whether they are just doing paraprofessional work or professional work that might be helpful for them. You know, in a library my size, the library assistant is quite regularly the only one in the building at any given moment, and could be supervising volunteers or dealing with, you know, big issues. They may be involved in programming, which I think would not be the case at a larger library with that job title. So I don't know how helpful the job titles are per se.
Right. I did try to steer people towards definitions, but I think even with the definitions, to take a different position, in the smallest libraries, the library director really does it all. You know, they are shelving as well as, you know, doing the management and administration of the budget and different things. So yeah, that is.
And the toilets.
Yeah, the toilets, sure.
Just one comment, and this may be venturing off into the weeds, but I'm thinking about a comparison with the amount of state funding that we get in our neighboring states and what they contribute, which is considerably higher than we do, and what their salary is. I mean, it's kind of off on a divergent path, but another comparison.
I think that's a great point, Peggy. You know, as a state advisory council, understanding what, if any, role state funding can contribute. Yep.
All right, that was great discussion. We shall move on to the technical support recommendation. And is this Is this Suzanne? Are you the one leading this one?
Or Suzanne, I can lead and you can chime in. Do you want to do that?
Sounds good.
Okay.
You can see
So-
better than I can.
Yes. So Suzanne actually kicked this off probably a year to 16 months ago now. This idea that libraries around Montana, as many of you know in this room, don't really have the IT support they need. In fact, the salary survey kind of revealed that. And so she developed a set of questions that were asked at each federation meeting. We've also had a lot of like small group one-on-one conversations with library directors. And what she did was she synthesized all that data and shared it with me. And she had some recommendations like the centralized state level IT support, cooperative group purchasing, technology training, website development. She also mentioned cybersecurity was a need. And I shared that document with Sean Anderson, our procurement officer. And because I thought of the cooperative group purchasing, I knew that that was something that the state can already do. And what happened was Sean said, actually, we might be able to help with a lot of these, if not all of them, through state procurement. And so I met with Sean and the state procurement office here, the state of Montana State Procurement Office. And we talked through these, and they have master IT contracts that we could literally do like a mini, they called it like a mini RFP, request for proposal process, where we would send kind of an outline of what we need to IT vendors that have already gone through the procurement process and been vetted, and there are a lot of them, and say, this is what libraries need. Can you give us an estimate of how much that would cost? And then libraries could pay in or could utilize the services of those IT vendors for IT support, website updates. I don't know about technology training, but we could certainly try that. And then separately, if cities and counties, that's would be the state procurement's preference, cities and counties could enter into an agreement with the state of Montana, and that would allow libraries to purchase hardware and software with the state of Montana's discounts. It actually benefits everyone because it's a bigger pool. So my question for you is, thinking about next fiscal year, which of these items would you like MSL staff to pursue? And if you are interested in us pursuing particularly the kind of mini RFP process, I could really use a couple volunteers to help us kind of outline the scope of work. And we could obviously enlist, I think, some other libraries and maybe some IT staff around the state to help us with that. So, Suzanne, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it really well.
All right, any questions or comments?
Tracy, I think that's interesting, the centralized state level IT support. I was actually talking with HP and their corporate offices and trying to get a quote on what it would be so I could take it to a couple of the other libraries that I know don't have IT, because we really struggle, and I'm the IT person and I Google a lot to try to figure out how to fix things. And so I was working with them to try to figure this out. So it was amazing so that we could kind of all pitch in and figure out what we could do. And I asked them if it just had to be HP computers, and they said no, they'd be able to help with everything, that they do this on another level with other corporations as well. So I would be willing to help with that because I've already started it if you want me to, but I think that there's a lot of us that don't have the IT support that spend a lot of time on our computers trying to figure them out.
I'm wondering if I can pick Jennifer's BTOP brain. I have vague recollections from BTOP that there were some not good things about state RFPs and procurement, like that it limited us maybe to certain manufacturers or certain IT people, or like there were things about it that were like, well, this, okay, I guess we have to do it this way. So that was one question I had, is like, is the pricing good enough to give up that control or the options that would be available without using that? And then the other thought I had is, when I'm looking for help on purchasing, I'm less concerned about the pricing because it's something I've maybe budgeted for, gotten special funds, a grant for, something like that. I'm more concerned with someone who knows what they're talking about, who can give me good advice on what it is I should purchase. Like, what are the specs that I need, that are going to meet my needs, work with the software I want it to work with, et cetera. And then I was remembering, Jim Simmelroth, was that his name, at Missoula Public Library, who was just like an absolute treasure. And that's what I want. I want someone like that, that is available to me, when I have needs, who really gets libraries and what our technology needs are, and who is available when I need it to give me, professional and trustworthy advice. And I don't know that we can't achieve that through these ideas, but those were just some of the, um, you know, the devil's advocate things that ran through my head from experience.
Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, but libraries wouldn't be required to use these services or be required to purchase off these lists. It would just be a resource that libraries could use if the resources met their needs and they were satisfied with the services.
Yes, that is correct. It's entirely voluntary.
Yeah.
Which is different from BTOP because
Right,
it was federal
exactly.
funding where you were forced into.
We were
certain
forced in,
projects.
and the state library was doing all of the procurement, so we had to do it through those state systems. So that's a bit of a difference. And I will say, those libraries who've gone through the internal wiring projects recently, that was all procured through these kinds of state contracts. And so recently we've had some really positive experiences going through this effort.
I do want to pipe in quickly about the group purchasing and the equipment. Yeah, I realize it's kind of a headache, and state library staff, we end up with the same computers and the same software and that kind of thing. But it does make it a whole lot easier for anybody who's providing support if there's, if the computers and the networks are all, using the same kinds of equipment, similar ages, similar software, that way when there is a bug, they have an idea of what it is. Keeping stuff up to date is so much easier. And while it probably wouldn't be required, it just makes life easier for everyone. And I know, you're giving up a little bit of your individuality, and it's like, oh, I see this great, bargain. But as people who do manage IT say, it's there is a benefit to having some uniformity in that.
I really like the ideas laid out in this document, and Bitterroot really benefited from that internal wiring project. And there's a lot of things in here that I've thought of over the years, or even brought up in different, NAC and other meetings. So I think it's great to see some movement on this and see the possibilities. In terms of implementation, I'd be curious if there was a majority of libraries in a federation, perhaps, that wanted to participate in this, if that might be a good way to kind of get it off the ground and just see, where you can say, oh, this worked really great for Broad Valley's Federation. They did this. And again, not even every library in that, because some might be part of county departments that don't want to get involved with it for whatever reason. But if there was a cohort of enough libraries in a sort of similar geographic region, so that way even having the on-site visits from IT people to visit them, they wouldn't have to go from Libby to Miles City to Plentywood and then down to Darby, and you could kind of cluster things that way. And those librarians that are already in those federations would probably already have some collegiality and kind of shared goals and community that would help them work together on this. So I think that's just an idea of seeing it kind of get off the ground. The only other thing I wanted to comment on this, which sort of relates back to the previous agenda item, the library development plan, is this stuff moves forward. I think it'd be great to see MSL try to sort of, even in very small ways, celebrate some of these victories. I was just thinking of at our library where we have the internal wiring. If there was just some little signage or placard to put up that says, this library is increased Wi-Fi provided by funds from the Montana State Library administered through LSTA or whatever, kind of like on the highway signs where you cross a bridge and it says, this bridge project funded. I mean, I read that stuff, but I read everything, but it's just kind of pathological at this point. But I do think something like that, it would be a nice way to get, as you kind of walk in the door of, where you have this stuff with your Wi-Fi password of, expanded Wi-Fi, more powerful Wi-Fi, whatever, just, simple sentence or two that gets Montana State Library in the, because, again, the whole thing, if you guys don't really, there's so much separation between the great work that the MSL staff does and the patrons' perception of it. They just think it's the local library. And of course, that is the biggest vessel and the biggest impact. But, I think giving credit where it's due is worthwhile to think about, especially if it's not a huge lift.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. That's a great idea, Mark.
IMLS loves that kind of recognition too, just throwing that out there. So I agree. I love all of this. I was struck by the fact that there's nothing in here about E-rate. And there's the federal program. I mean, that's a whole federal program that is set up to assist schools and libraries with their, and I know it has really helped Great Falls Public Library upgrade to a fiber connection. It pays a lot for our broadband. And it was terrifying. It is terrifying every single year when I try to do it. And then at the end, you have to like pledge your firstborn child that that you have made no mistakes. And I think I called Suzanne a gajillion times about that. And I think because it has so many barriers and is so difficult, a lot of libraries don't even access that, but that is a pool of funding that is available to help people. So if we can leverage local dollars and state dollars to tap into those federal dollars, I don't know where that fits in. It is a terribly problematic process, but I just wanted to, I was struck by the fact that it wasn't in here.
I wonder if there are there have been historically state consultants, and I know some of them have retired, but there may be some consultants either through state IT contracts or NASIO or something like that that we could just explore.
That was another BTOP service was, we had a, what do you call that? A second party, third party, a company who would do it. It was still work, but for the library, but they would do the hardest, most frustrating parts of it for you.
Right. And when Great Falls did its fiber contract to, which was paid for 80% by E-rate, we actually ended up hiring a company to help us with the contracting, and it was expensive. It was, $2,000, but to use $2,000 to get $35,000 seemed like a pretty good spend. But it is difficult to access, but can be super helpful.
So that would fall under the cooperative group purchasing, will it?
I don't notice Suzanne's mic had unmuted there, and I think she has done a lot of legwork on E-rate. Suzanne, do you want to share your observations?
I was trying to get in on the conversation there, and there are states that contract with E-rate companies to provide support, and they've pretty much turned it over to them. So that is an option. I think it's difficult for, I mean, we do have individual libraries that have consultants working on it for them as well. So it's also an individual library option.
You do have to filter if you're going to use E-rate.
For internet, you could use it for phones. Right.
Oh, no,
right.
It doesn't cover phones anymore. That went out several years ago.
So one thing we don't have on this memo is like an understanding of, each bullet point concept and like what it's gonna require in terms of staff resources and money. So I feel like it's hard to say what should be prioritized without knowing more information about what we would be asking of you. But that's the question when you say, which of these items would you like us to pursue? We could say all of them. Or we could say, we think the most important thing is cooperative group purchasing, or we think the most important thing is, okay. Does anybody have any comments in that direction for Tracy and Suzanne? Which of these items would you like MSL staff to pursue in the coming fiscal year?
And if it would be helpful, so I think the technology training, that's a capacity issue. We definitely share what we can. Colay is great about doing that, as well as other state library staff. The cooperative group purchasing, in terms of, so the ironic thing is that I think procurement thought that was the easiest, but actually to me, that is harder than the centralized IT support and website update, because the centralized website, centralized IT support and website update, that's us working together to define what we think libraries need and then getting a sense of how much that would cost and whether it's doable. And I actually asked about the regional thing because I had learned through the internal wiring that IT vendors definitely have regions. And so it's probably unlikely that one state IT vendor is going to be able to do the entire state. And certainly pursuing the federation idea is a really great one, Mark. And so I think the centralized IT support is interestingly enough, is the lowest hanging fruit because it involves the state's IT vendor list, which is actually quite lengthy. I mean, it's not just one or two, it's a lot. And it just involves defining what libraries need and getting a sense of how much that costs. The cooperative group purchasing, in order to make that happen, involves us and or libraries negotiating with a bunch of counties and a bunch of cities to get them to enter into an agreement with the state of Montana. So that, interestingly enough to me, is the harder thing to go after, if that helps you in terms of capacity.
And then help me understand, Tracy, at this point, because the LSTA funding has already been set for the 5-year cycle, none of that is available to go towards these projects?
Nope, you actually you budget the LSTA every year. So you could choose in this budget cycle to put some money towards this. I will say, I think I was envisioning you'd have the staff time, which is paid for by LSTA, but that the local libraries would be the ones to put in the funding to pay for the service directly to themselves, to their library, basically.
So Tracy, we would essentially be creating kind of a menu of services that libraries could choose from based on their local library needs, whether it's hardware replacement, software replacement, IT support, web development, E-rate consulting, something like that.
Yes, except for, I'm not sure about the hardware software. I think probably the way that that would work is in that mini RFP, you might say to the IT vendors, please give us a bid for how much it would cost to give us advice on purchasing hardware and software, provide tech support for every hour that the library's open, do website updates. So there'd be a selection of them. However, I don't believe hardware and software itself, if the libraries wanted that, that would involve that cooperative group purchasing and the negotiation of agreements.
And the state is solely a Dell. Dell's our only provider of hardware now.
So I don't want to make this more confusing, but my very first job in Seattle was providing technology assistance to nonprofits. And so one of the issues that we ran into all the time is that there'd be an office and all of their computers were like donations from businesses that didn't need them anymore. So you were like, okay, so you're running a Mac and you're running a PC that's 5 years old and I don't even know what that is. And you've got 6 printers because the drivers won't and so I am, and my library doesn't need this because we hire our own IT people. So I feel a little bit bad speaking out about this, but I feel like that the tech support and the hardware software issue are often super combined because the more ad hoc and duct tape together your system, the harder it is to provide tech support for you. And I don't really know how that is helpful as a comment, except to say that they seem pretty entwined to me. And what we might need is just more information about what exactly, like, what do the libraries that say they need this, what actually do they need?
Well, my impression is they desperately want the IT support more than anything. And website update. But Suzanne, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and the problem is, of course, that kind of as you hint at, what libraries mean by IT support is all over all over. And that's a little bit harder to define. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. And I've been trying to get some input from states that are already doing this, and I've had absolutely no success yet. I know Tennessee provides this kind of service, and my contact in Tennessee had an email reply that said he'd be back in the office in November. And yeah, this was just recently that I emailed him, so that was not encouraging. And Washington is working on something like this too, but it's for 2025. So they may still be working out the kinks as well. So I think you've hit on what some of the challenges are, though, is exactly what this is going to look like and how to cover the wide range of potential things. So, perhaps it is, when we're talking about tech support, it is a matter of trying to get tighter definitions and a better idea, and starting with a region to do that with.
Would it make sense to do a pilot like you did with the wiring and project? I was thinking along the same lines as Suzanne, like IT support is either you want somebody's help when you're setting up new equipment, or you desperately need someone's help right now because this thing is not working. So it's like an on-demand, where are you? I need you here now. We're not going to be able to provide people who can pop into your library on demand. We could provide potentially someone who can help you set up things, and we could maybe provide somebody who you could get access to, through a computer connection so that they're walking you through something. But it is, yeah, IT support does seem very open-ended.
I think it's worth asking like how much remote support people can give. Nowadays, IT can do 95% remote.
You'd have to
Big
have
vendors like
you'd have to have your internet up and running, right? Like, so if your whole network was down, you wouldn't be able to easily connect on remote support.
I thought Susie's comment was helpful, just sort of framing the notion that there's probably libraries out there that don't know what they need. And that's why it'd be helpful to have some of these IT people just sort of look, kind of peek under the hood and see what's going on. And I think it's sort of, relates to that sort of just general concept of librarianship, where we've all dealt with patrons that come in and they think they need one thing. And then the more you sort of like peel back the layers of their questioning in the reference interview, you realize, oh, you actually need something different. This is the better way. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with some of this IT thing, where some people think that they need that. And it's like, oh, no, you actually don't need 4 new computers. You just need a new router, or you need to reconfigure the way this one computer is interacting with this. So I think the potential for the problems libraries are experiencing to actually be revealed to be a little less complex than they think might be here, which I think would be a huge benefit. But yeah, I really think there's a ton of great potential here. So thank you all.
And I think some problems, the immediate, oh my God, this isn't working, could be alleviated if you have somebody that comes once a month and says, we are doing your patches, we're doing your updates, here's your new drivers, we're gonna reboot, so that some of that could be alleviated, but not all of it,
When I think about the like IT and technology related emails we see on Wired, like there's, I need a new barcode scanner. Somebody tell me what to buy, or I need a new receipt printer. So I do think there's a bullet point that could be added. It's not cooperative group purchasing, but that is like a list of what to purchase, or like best practices lists, sort of, so that if that's your question, if your question is, I don't know what to buy, could there be somebody amongst these, was it 8 libraries or 8% of libraries that have the IT staff? Are there people who could put together and would have to be updated regularly? I know MSC used to do that, Amy, like these are the barcode scanners you should buy, and these are the places you can buy them, or something like that, that would help folks in knowing what hardware and software to pursue, even if you couldn't do the cooperative purchasing piece. Oh, Suzanne, yes.
I was going to suggest that perhaps part of the pilot could be having one of the IT people come in and do an assessment of some of the libraries that wanted to participate in the project, and get an idea of exactly what their needs were. Because I was struck when I was listening to Mark that when I was talking with Jim Semmelroth about this, when we first started talking about it, he said the same kind of thing, that a lot of times what libraries think their needs are quite different from what he'd find when he'd actually go in and take a look. And, and he'd find that their problem was actually something much different. And so, I think that might be kind of a starting point.
Few years ago, we had a assessment by Saddle Peak Technologies. How comprehensive was that study, and would that be something to build on, and how was that funded?
Was that the gigabit thing?
Yeah.
That was incredibly comprehensive, and that's actually what led to the internal wiring project. It is now quite dated, actually, really, for IT purposes. It might almost be like 4 years ago that we did that.
It was 20,
yeah.
Yeah, and
5 years
I think
ago.
was it Coltex? I think it was Coltex money that was paid for that particular assessment.
Yep.
It was super valuable, Kara, but what I would say, I think what I am hearing librarians say is, yes, we love that, and yes, we need that, and we need help with the ongoing, just maintaining your IT. And so that, I think, is what was driving Suzanne to kind of suggest these ideas, like how do we tackle that lack of IT support? Because some of our smallest libraries are never going to be able to afford an IT person. And yet, they don't have a lot of options locally. And with technology and remote IT assistance, it really is pretty amazing. If your internet is up, it's amazing what an IT person can do, even if they're based, 200 or 300 miles away from you. So I think that is what led us to kind of explore this particular option and see how it would go. But I agree that an assessment is probably the first step for the pilot.
Jonna?
So as far as an assessment is concerned, I think that's really a great idea. In my situation, because my library is actually part of the courthouse, we have IT in-house. However, turnover can be an issue. We had some turnover a couple years ago. An IT department that was very, very new, didn't have a lot of the skills. And personally, I just think it would be nice to be able to know how to troubleshoot some of the stuff myself and just have a little bit of my own autonomy, and just to be educated with even just the public side of things, maybe not even my network side, but just the public side of things that I could do on my own in the event that, once again, our IT department turns over or somebody leaves or we have an issue with that, because my guess is we're probably not going to be able to find somebody again who is, educated in IT in our small little world. We've got kind of a good thing going now, but you don't know what's going to happen. And just to have a little bit of that background, I think would be really nice, even if we do have it. So that's just my 2 cents.
So maybe that's like some low hanging fruit of like just making checklists for if you have public computers, here's the software that we recommend. You should have deep freeze and you should do this is how you set that up. And we've got a lot of stuff for the MSC, but I think public computers and staff computers are some of the things that people need. Like, do people understand what a patch is? I do not. And that might be a good, very basic thing to give to people.
I would think an outcome of an assessment or a pilot, I should say, would be evaluating, you guys might hate this idea, but the degree to which some better standardization in IT might help support the support model. I think we can all assume that if an IT position knew that all the libraries in his or her region had the same workstations, that had the same Microsoft operating system and different kinds of applications on it, it's that much easier to support versus the library that has the donated computers that Susie mentioned. So helping to understand where that break even point might be to manage the cost for that support versus the investment in some more standardized systems. I suspect some of the internal wiring systems that we've been working on would lend themselves well to this kind of IT support. And that could then make the case for more state funding for the ongoing actual hardware and software requirements that libraries have.
I was just thinking about the fact that cooperative purchasing, you said, was a little more difficult. And yet at the same time, what I hear from former BTOP libraries all the time is that, man, I wish we could get our computers replaced. And I think about how much of a savings those libraries could get if they were purchasing. And to what you were just saying, all be on the same equipment, all have the same things that are in their libraries. So when troubleshooting is needed, it's a little bit easier to focus on. So I guess I hear you that the need is maybe more in one of those other areas, but I feel like we don't want to leave out cooperative purchasing entirely. And maybe it's something if we don't do it this year, maybe down the road, that's something we could come back to, because I feel like it's really important.
So how does it work when we through BTAP and we did Envisionware? But it was because it was the federal funding. That's why our individual cities and counties didn't have to sign MOUs. Is that the difference? We don't have to sign anything for MSC software, right? Our cities and counties aren't involved in that. So can you model off of that for some of the software based cooperative purchasing?
So what I
Oh,
can,
go ahead, Sean.
sorry, and correct me if
John,
you,
introduce yourself for the group, please.
my name's Sean Anderson. I am the grants and contracts coordinator for the state library. Tracy and I have talked to state procurement about this quite a bit. Cooperative purchasing, I think everybody's intention is for that to be a pretty low barrier. The expectation is that the MOUs would be signed at the county level and not have to be managed by an individual department. You know, they wouldn't want to have MOUs with libraries and then have planning departments have separate MOUs. They would like to approach it countywide. But the intention, if it's not already this way, is to improve the process so that it is a really low barrier for counties to get those MOUs in place. It helps everybody. Everybody benefits when these cooperative contracts get utilized. And the other thing that I'll say that I think might be the even better answer to your question is they're working on getting basically a front end marketplace set up to make use of these cooperative contracts so that you're not having to jump through a bunch of hoops. Do I have an MOU in place? Genevieve, can you place these orders for 25 laptops and then ship them to Great Falls or wherever? The idea of this marketplace would be that you would be able to, once you have that MOU in place, you would then have access to a place where you could shop for any kind of, basically anything that the state purchases cooperatively, whether it's IT equipment, whether it's contracted services, the full spectrum would be available to you. But it's state procurement that would be working on that. And Tracy and I really like the idea of getting that out to the counties, getting it out to the libraries specifically as soon as we possibly can.
So they would have something like, I have access to Emacs and I can shop from that. They would have similar access to
Yes,
Emacs.
but it
Or, I
wouldn't.
mean, it wouldn't be Emacs, but it would be that same storefront.
Yeah,
Which
because
is a
Emacs is kind of
state thing.
well, it's a state thing, but it's also messy. Like it's not super easy to use.
Yeah.
But like I said, everybody has some motivation to make use of these contracts. So the easier it is to access them and take advantage of them,
Yeah.
the better. So that's what they're working toward right now.
They'd have like a website they could go access, order from. It knows that they already have MOU. It knows where, like, all the
Yep.
shipping, how to bill it, all that stuff's already in there. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a government website. There's still probably going to be some red tape and hoops to jump through and things that are super annoying, but I would guess that it's going to be an order of magnitude less annoying than the current state of things.
And I guess like the end game of this item is, you know, instead of libraries just going out and trying to order through Amazon or directly from Dell.com or wherever, there's a portal that you get, you know, kind of wholesale or near wholesale pricing. And it's just, you know, you log in, have the credentials, maybe upload your document or whatever, you know, accountability has to be required. But the end game is you get, you know, a much more competitive price than you would as a regular consumer, which is what most libraries unfortunately have to purchase at, is just the same as a private individual. You're just, you know, limited.
Like Sean, back in my understanding is the state one is, it has kind of already gone through and weeded out, has some basic computers available. But if you need to go beyond that, you can go outside that catalog if you need something really specialized, but it kind of picks the basic models to go with.
So,
yeah, that's true. And I mean, in any case, you're getting a volume discount. You know, the state of Montana is ordering thousands and thousands of computers. So we come at a significant discount that frankly isn't available to other agencies right now. So if we can just open those doors to those lower price points, I think that ticks the boxes that Mark's describing.
So if you are a city library, would your city need to do the MOU? And so Cascade County would do one for Belt and Wentworth, and Great Falls would do one for Great Falls.
Correct. And I think the person that's in charge of these cooperative contracts, the State Procurement Bureau, is really loves this idea. So I think if we do run into weird situations where there's city county operations that we need to navigate, I think he would be very happy to jump in and resolve those questions.
Is the MOU with the entity that's paying the invoice?
So it would be with the county, and so I'm not entirely sure what the mechanics look like, but if the MOU is in place with the county, the library as a county department would then have permission, ability to purchase via these contracts.
I was asking because back in the day at my library, if any technology was going to be purchased, it was going to be the Friends of the Library paying the bill, because that was the group that had funds available that we could use for technology. So yeah, that's just why I was asking Sean, is if a library was paying for it with funding that wasn't coming directly from their city or county, how would that impact the MOU?
I don't know that it would. I mean, the MOU would not be with your friends organization. That's a separate entity altogether. But I think we could probably offer some guidance or some best practices for how to handle the accounting for that. If your friends organization can make their gift and make it restricted for the purchase of technology, that way you're maintaining a paper trail for what that money, where it came from, what's it for, and where did it get spent. That's more of an internal operation for the individual library, but I think we could help navigate those waters.
Okay, Alyssa, I understand your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to apologize up front. I had to step away for 15 minutes. So if this has been addressed, I'm sorry. But looking at these three categories, I'm wondering if maybe starting off with a cooperative group purchasing, because then that's really dependent on the individual library and their desire to move forward with this process. I know for me that in and of itself would be incredibly helpful, because to me it already creates somewhat of a vetted list of technologies that are like sort of pre-approved by the state, that I could then purchase from. I also, when we got our laptops to be able to check out, my first thought was, how am I going to purchase a replacement once this goes out the door and I don't get it back? Right? Because I can't purchase another one and have it set up in the same way. And so could I buy extra ones from the state? And I tried doing the MOU and getting that in place, so that way I would have that option available to me, and it was just a little too complicated and had to drop that. But I think that would be a good first step. I did have a question, and we can get back to it later, about how plug-in ready they would be. Would they be somewhat preloaded with certain things? Thinking in particular, if they were like a basic computer lab type computer, would they be, say preloaded with Microsoft Word, Office and stuff, where then it just basically is mailed and staff get to plug it in? And then my last thought was just, if we were able to go with centralized IT support, where the state could contract with someone that would, maybe for now just remote in and help solve IT issues that way, would we have access to, say, I would assume this would have to go through some sort of ticket system. And so could we use the data off of that ticket system to then maybe move into sort of the hands-on in-person technology? We would have data to back up that we actually do really need someone that can physically go to all of these libraries. And then that would probably provide some data on what training is most needed. Just my thoughts.
Thanks, Alyssa. And Lori, your hand is raised.
Yeah, would the purchasing of the computers come with, I know, IT to set them up, like Alyssa was saying, because the issues that we're having can be done remote. It's why is the printer no longer communicating with the computer? How do I fix that so the patrons can print? Why is my printer no longer communicating with their cell phone so that they can print from their cell phone? And the other one is, why is this computer stuck in a loop? How do I fix it so that it gets out of the loop? But setting up printers and things like that in the library on our patron computers seems to be a challenge for some reason. And the city redid our whole server between Christmas and New Year's, and I was down for 2 weeks trying to find somebody just to come in, or remote. All they did was remote, and they got on each computer and they'd call me and say, okay, I'm ready for the next computer. And they would log in, and through our server would have to try to figure out how to set up the printers and access and things like that. So those are most of the issues that libraries are having with IT stuff. It's kind of pretty basic. It's nothing, I haven't seen anything where anybody's actually had to physically walk into the building to, because the IT person can call me and then I end up doing what they tell me to do and it works. But if we do have that, who's going to set up the computers for us when we need new computers?
I mean, the only answer that I have to that is that you know, the cooperative purchasing itself is just for the equipment and the equipment itself. It wouldn't come with any setup support. I think if you were looking for remote support to help with that setup process, those kinds of services are also available through the cooperative purchasing agreements. But I think what we've, or certainly the conversations that I've been a part of to this point have been more focused on what can we offer at a statewide level, and not continue fragmenting with, you know, multiple libraries having multiple agreements with support entities, companies, whatever you want to call it. But I think to Lori's and Alyssa's point, that is worth considering, that, you know, purchasing the hardware is purchasing the hardware. Any sort of software maintenance or software installs and updates, all of that would still need to be done individually by the libraries.
So if I could jump in, I mean, I think in my ideal world, we would have statewide hardware and software for those libraries who want to play, and printers and all of the peripherals, and the centralized IT support. I think we'd probably all agree there are a lot of challenges to that, from libraries being able to afford, you know, new computers and new printers, et cetera, to just the complexities. In listening to this conversation, I actually think the best course of action is for Sean and I to truly find a pilot group of libraries, just a small group, and to go into this with the idea that we would explore setting up the cooperative purchase agreements, having the standardized equipment and software, and the IT support, and we would see what we learn. Because that's what we did with the internal wiring, and it really helped to do that pilot. It was very eye-opening and educational. And I feel like we're aware of the challenges, and maybe that's just what we need to do here. That is what's going to really be able to inform the next step.
I agree. And I think what comes out of a process like that, Tracy, is some like standardized procedures too, that we're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. I mean, that you mentioned the internal wiring project, that was like near the tail end of it, the first round when I came on, and I remember being super confusing. But we just did another round of it, and you know, we, like you said, we learned a lot from that initial process. So doing it a second time was way more streamlined. We all kind of knew what to expect, what the pitfalls were, and could get through it a lot more quickly. And I think the same would be true for tech purchases like this.
Thank you, Sean and Suzanne and Tracy, for your work on this. I'm afraid we haven't done a good job of answering that second question. With the changes made today, are you still hoping to have these volunteers? Lori did volunteer herself.
I think
My library would definitely be interested. We're at the point where we can't rely on county IT, and we're already trying to source some sort of remote IT contract. So if we can get this to work, I mean, that would be all the better.
Okay. Jonna, it would be really interesting too to tackle this in northeastern Montana. So I'm almost wondering if like a small group in Golden Plains, a small group in Tamarack, and a small group in Broad Valleys would give us somewhat of a feel. Could I ask for your help on that too?
Sure, absolutely. Good idea.
And so these guys are volunteering to be pilot libraries? Is that correct? Or are they volunteering to assist MSL staff with the development of a list of desired services, evaluation criteria, and review of a plan for implementing this project?
The second.
Okay. Did you guys hear that online? Okay,
I did not.
Tracy's going to repeat what she just said.
Yeah, so I think the way I see this working is mostly Alyssa, Lori, and Jonna, you are helping with the first initial list of services, how this might work, and helping convince one or two of your peers to join you. And then in the case of maybe Lori and Alyssa, at least, you will be the pilot, part of the pilot libraries. And certainly, Jonna, you would be welcome to do that too. But your role is giving feedback on the list of services needed and helping to recruit a couple of additional pilot libraries.
Hopefully all three of you are still on board after that clarification.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm also interested with my situation in having branch libraries, you know, how that may impact how these services work as well. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, unless there's further comment, we will move on. I'll give just a moment in case there is anything else online or in the room. Okay, I'm going to move around to agenda items. We're going to skip over preliminary FY25 budget priorities discussion because in the room we have Bruce Newell as well as I can only see her if I bend the opposite direction. But are you Kirsten? Is that correct? Kirsten Cooper, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Kirsten. I am the Executive Director of the Trust for Montana Libraries. I was previously a teacher librarian and I live in Missoula, so I was doing that in some high schools in Missoula, 2 of them, and then I also worked in the K-8 library at Lolo at their school.
Well, we're delighted for this chance to, and this is Bruce, to talk with you folks. This is such a fun group and has traditionally been the kind of the Energizer Bunny for the state library in terms of figuring out what's important and how to make it go forward. So it's a pleasure to speak with you. I think you all know about the trust, at least generally. You know, our goal, we're the state library's foundation. We're the 501c3 foundation. And we have kind of 2 goals: is to help with money, help fund state library projects, and also advocate for libraries as a public good. I think we had a pretty good year for fundraising. Kirsten, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we do. you know, like an annual ask, a fall campaign, and we kind of took a little different approach this year, letting people know about some of the advocacy things that we're going to be doing, and we set a pretty moderate fundraising goal, but we almost doubled what we were asking for, so that's good. Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge amount of money in the first place, but we're getting our name out there and getting some support, so that's good.
Stu Wilson, our president, basically reminds us all the time that it's baby steps, that we're moving towards a goal. So doubling what we took in the year before is good. The kind of support we want to provide for the state library will require, you know, tens and hundreds and perhaps millions of dollars. We're nowhere near that. We're not even within shouting distance, but the local support helps us basically establish a case when we go and approach larger fundraisers, and that's part of our strategy. We do have two working committees. One's fundraising committee, and the other one is an advocacy committee. The advocacy committee, that is really hard to say. It may be lunchtime. Met last week and came up with a plan. You know, kind of in the tradition of the Network Advisory Council. I'd like to try this plan out on you, and please provide advice. I'd like to hear what you think about our plan for going forward. But before I do that, actually, let me talk just briefly about the early childhood education. I think that's probably should come first. Bobby and I and some other folks with the trust have been talking about really amping up the state libraries, statewide programs in early childhood education. And Bobby, are you prepared to talk about the kinds of things that we spoke about?
Sure. I put together a guideline for how we might approach this in basically a research methodology in order to determine the steps we need to take to get to helping out with the early literacy situation here in the state. Primarily the youngest of our library patrons are the main target for this. And what we are looking at is going through finding a defined research topic and then supporting that with either a researcher from a university or getting an RFP. We haven't really gotten to that point yet. But first, we really want to start with a solid research topic and then go on to find someone to get answers to that topic on our behalf. And some of the topics that came up when we spoke involved where exactly we need to target for these younger readers. We already know that in Montana, there is some effort going into some of those older kids, the 5 to 8, I believe it was. And we're again looking at more of the 0 to 2. There's already some national programs going out 0 to 3 that we might be able to bundle in with, and we're going to look into that. Another thing I plan to do is a literature search to see what other states and other entities are doing in this area and what research has already been done and what we might be able to build off of, supplement, or just kind of work alongside in order to build programs that'll work for our state.
One of the things that Jenny has reminded us constantly is whatever we do ideally should be measurable, because that will help us argue for things. Early childhood education is a relatively easy thing to raise money for. So one of the things that, as Bobby mentioned, is as we kind of pick projects for the state library to do, we obviously have to consider the state library's capacity and your capacity as public libraries. But we also need to find something that is relatively easy for the trust to go out and raise money for. The actual content of what programs come out from the state library is up to staff and the commission to decide. That's really not the trust to do. But we're hoping that when you pitch us that ball to go and find money, that it's it's slow and even across the middle of the plate. Give us something that's easier than otherwise to take and raise money for. And we'll kind of get the process started and kind of see from going from there. One of my daughters is a great writer, and she reminds me that the best storytelling is showing, not telling. And we think that early childhood education is a great way of showing the public value of libraries to those people that we serve. And so we're really excited about this, not only to support great programs, but also as a way of advocating for the public good of public libraries. You want to add anything to that, Kirsten?
No, I think that was perfect.
Good God. I was thinking earlier today that perfection is such a dangerous thing. Jody, I think we should aim for sufficient. Let's say, if was it sufficient? Yes.
That was sufficient.
Perfect is another planet for me. The advocacy committee is thinking about a couple things, and much of this is sort of aiming at the coming legislative session in 2025, but also some of it's sort of general. One of the things that we're talking about is we were asked by foundations, the big 5 foundations, to provide some help for people finding foundations in friends groups in Montana. And so Kirsten has pulled together, actually with your help, Rebecca, with a list of foundations and friends groups in Montana. Right now, it's just a PDF document. It's sort of one step forward. We'd like to do much better, and we'd really like to have your, as public library directors, but also as your foundations and friends, to tell us exactly what you need as we start to put up sort of online help for supporting library stuff statewide, but more particularly locally in Montana. So that's sort of something that we're working on. We were asked by the foundations to put up sort of a landing page for advocacy. We're not thinking so much about book banning and those kinds of things as we're thinking about libraries as a public good, a place where you know all what I referred to earlier this morning. The why public libraries are useful and kind of branch from there. And we're actually working on a draft of that. And so watch this space. The other thing which is really intriguing is the community library in Idaho, which after a little bit of investigation turns out to be the Ketchum Public Library, has something called a little book of big stories. And it's basically what the state library here did a couple years ago with one-liners. But what it is it's kind of why I love my library, or why my library is important to me, or what value do I find in my library. 2 or 3 short paragraphs. But what's really powerful about this thing that Ketchum put out statewide is that lists the person who said it, and it lists their community. So you get these sort of heartwarming stories about why libraries are cool. The other thing you get from after going through a couple of these is you start this statewide picture of the importance of libraries starts to emerge. And it's incredibly powerful. The stories are great, but together they're really powerful. The trust is thinking about putting together a version of that that would be available in PDF format, but also in printed format. We would need help doing that because the 2025 session is coming at us quickly. Would you guys be willing and able to help us gather that from your communities, encourage other librarians around the state to help us gather those stories?
We would need community members to submit the stories.
I believe that's how it worked.
But we would help gather them in our communities.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I just know that we need salesmen on the ground, sales people on the ground to get this to cover. I mean, ideally, what we would do is we get one from every community that has a public library that turns on its lights. I mean, ideally, does that make sense to you, Jenny and Tracy? Is that possible?
So last time a couple years ago when we did the I Love My Library survey, it was fairly simple because we just posted the link on the online catalog and got responses that way.
Oh, cool. So maybe if we did something similar to that, we could add to the form.
Well, and that's what we're looking for, right? Like we can even still call it that if we want to. It doesn't have to be completely modeled after what Ketchum did, but same idea.
What was powerful about Ketchum's, it was a statewide picture. I'll tell you what, I'll post the link on Wired and you can all kind of take a look at it and see. So that's what we're thinking about with the advocacy committee, and we hope that works for you folks. What suggestions do you have for the trust, or what questions might you have for the trust that we could answer?
And I'll just say too, really quickly, when we were talking about forming those committees, we're really talking about, with that advocacy committee, changing the narrative of public libraries that is out there right now, right? And so, yes, how can we help you get your stories out and let the right people know how important your libraries are to your patrons?
And I should also probably add that we're working in coordination with the Government Affairs Committee of the Montana Library Association. And you know, they hire Central House Strategies as lobbyists to help with legislative things every 2 years. They're going to probably handle that kind of stuff. We're going to help them as they ask us to, but that's their job. Our job is this more general job to talk about the public good of libraries, and to hopefully sooner than later find big bucks to help the state library continue to knock the ball out of the park.
Alyssa has her hand raised.
Two things. One thing to think about, particularly as you're looking to support sort of the early childhood literacy efforts. One of the things that's just been probably the most positive has been Imagination Library. And I know that that's First Lady Gianforte's, that's her baby. I have personally worried about its longevity. I don't necessarily know what her plans are to keep it going into the future, especially because she's, currently funding for it, for most of the libraries. I know for mine, because I already had it, she's funding it at half the rate. And so I have worried about when she has to step away from that project, how we're going to keep that going, since it is offered through it's offered through our libraries. And so maybe there's a way to sort of plan for the future with that with her. But a sidebar, going back to you needing feedback, currently my library is looking to pursue a library district. And so we are already searching for public comments. I have 112 pages of public comments on why people like their libraries. I'm happy to look through those and kind of talk. I mean, we're already going to talk to some of them about submitting them as letters to the editor. And I can talk to them about if they feel comfortable with me passing them on to you and to use for your work as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And good luck with the district. Wow.
Thank you. That's why I ran off. They officially passed the resolution to put it on the ballot at 11 a.m. So.
Yay.
Wow.
Congratulations.
That's cool. That was really cool.
Bruce, I pulled up the PDF of the little book and I'm flipping through it and it's super cute. It was put together well, but it's like, it's all text and it made me think, Montanans are so talented and creative. What if we also allowed them to, we've done a lot of like, why do we love the library? But like, could they write a library haiku? Or they could paint a picture of their library, or they could, I don't know, just how could we be more creative in this?
Yeah. And does it have to be a book, or could it be a digital collection online?
Oh,
or
Yeah.
both?
I think given some of our audiences, we need a paper version, but definitely both.
And
No, I think that's really a good suggestion. So I just took from that, talk to Jennifer.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. But that was one of that
Yeah.
campaign years ago. What was so great, it was that, there was very little text to it on those posters. And there were these photographs of people that you're like, I want to know them. Or if it was someone from your community, it was so cool because it was like, I know that person. And so, yeah, I think adding in more of a visual element, maybe making it, I mean, maybe not everyone wants to submit their photograph when they're sharing a story, but just making it more multimedia or just more modern.
Exactly.
Because we're not just books.
I'd like to challenge too, that we don't just do it. Your statement was every library that turns on the lights. I would like us to get information from the digital libraries as well, including the history portal and state gov documents, and our talking book library, because I feel like those are huge services for the state of Montana as well, and that we should be including those in any of our efforts. So,
Stu and I were talking about something else last week, and we discussed that probably few people in Montana realize how much money the state library saves for them through reduced costs for services and improved capability in their local libraries. And I think that there is that may be a different campaign than what we're imagining, but I'm not sure I see how. I'm now looking at Kirsten. Are these things that we can do as one big chunk? I think the product that we've been thinking about was really public library oriented.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think then we've talked a lot about how not a lot of people know that we have a state library or what the state library does. I think people think it's like a library that you would walk into and, go to children's story hour or whatever. And I think a lot of people are unaware of all the services the state library provides. So I think that actually is and would be so easy to
Yeah.
add. I mean, there would not be a reason to not add it really, because it would just add to the importance of all of the libraries and all of the services, I think.
Oh, I think I can see how that might, yeah. Okay. So, can I volunteer one of your employees to help us with this?
I think you just did.
Okay, great. Well, this is very helpful. This is extraordinarily helpful. Thank you very much.
Alyssa, is your hand up again?
Yes. One thing, Bruce, real quick, because I have been obviously researching various campaign strategies and things to take to the campaign committee. And it made me think of one that I got in talking to someone named Melissa. She's a PR specialist, and she's currently working on a campaign for a wellness center. And she talked about how they're going to be doing a art and essay contest with just the title of like, what does wellness mean to you? And they have like local art galleries that are going to be accepting the submissions, and then local bookstores accepting the essay submissions. But maybe a statewide something, we're thinking of, for our campaign, maybe doing a what does community mean to you, but maybe something like that, an art essay contest statewide. Just wanted to share that thought because I really liked that idea that came from that conversation.
No, I can't remember. I'm looking to Jenny because she might remember when. But a long time ago, we did this cool campaign called A Day in the Library, and it had photos and stories from people, and it generated incredible content that would easily lend itself to something like this.
Yeah, it's probably been at least 10 years since we've done something like that. I think it was a part of a national campaign, if I recall.
So the trick with all this is all great, and I think there's great stuff we can incorporate into our efforts here. The trust has limited capacity for, and we don't have graphic artists. We don't. We lost our printing press in the flood. So we need to figure out something we can do. The other thing that comes to my mind instantly is that this is. I want to take a step forward, realizing that we're going to be doing this into the future indefinitely. So I want to do something that we can start on that's successful, and that we can build on for 2027 and 2029 and so forth. And I also really value being guided by this group because I think you guys are always ask busy people to help get things done, right? And you guys are the busy people, so I appreciate it.
I'm thinking if we were collecting things locally, the main thing we would need help with is whatever release form we needed to
Oh, yeah.
present to someone who had drawn a picture or had, submitted a story. So that's something that the trust could help put together so that locally we could be collecting.
And that may
I
be something. that you
feel
wanna
like we might need to come up with just like the general question, right? Like so that all of the submissions are kind of along the same vein, right? So we'll have to get together and come up with what we want.
Yeah, I can see the way this is put together is going to be different than I had envisioned. But this seems good. Thank you. Oh, and thank you for what you guys do. Appreciate it.
Have you seen those, you see them on shorts or TikToks or whatever, those short form visual media where people are like, of course I'm a preschool teacher. Of course I have paste in my hair, or whatever. Like, could we do it? Like, I love my library. Of course I have high-speed internet at home thanks to hotspots. Or something like some sort of where we give them a prompt in a slightly different way. We've done the I love my library and that's great. And that's what we're talking about. But I don't know, something that just like hits people a little and gets them to think of it differently. Hashtag.
So you got that part? Yeah, I mean, no, I'm seriously, it's just as well I'm retired. This is all stuff that I don't, this is like, you might as well be speaking Dutch.
It would be saying the same things in a very current way and in a format that could reach people. I think.
Keeping in mind that format matters for people like the legislature and our county commissioners and
Yes.
others who decidedly are not on TikTok.
But
I mean, the
that's
audience,
where we could play a role because we could take short videos and load them in a collection online where they're
But
easily accessible.
100% we need to give them something in print.
yeah, I mean, the audience I'm thinking about are
Yeah.
people who work in this building every 2 years.
Yeah.
That's my audience. And then if it works locally, that's okay with me, but this is the audience right here I'm thinking about it. Which I think will be will generalize. And then we'll kind of step back and see how this worked. But middle of 2025, we'll have the same discussion and figure out what we do better next time.
I just want to say really quickly how excited I am to have the trust here and to be a part of these conversations. This is exactly what I want to see from us moving forward. I want us to see the trust as kind of this fundraising arm of the work that we're doing. I think far too often, Rebecca and I were at a great training a couple of weeks ago, and one of the discussions was around innovation and ideation. And the trainer likened that process to building a fire. And we as Montanans know that the most important thing to building a fire is the kindling. You need heat and oxygen, but you need kindling before you throw the logs on. And I think we are very quick to identify the barriers, i.e. the logs that are going to smother our fires. And we really want to spend more time with our little smoldering fire that can grow into something more. And so taking the time to have opportunities for us to ideate and involve each other, and the trust is going to be fruitful as we see these kinds of opportunities to focus on early literacy and advocacy and whatever else is going to come next. Kirsten's going to spend some time with our staff after this meeting, hopefully doing some of that kind of ideating. And I hope that we can continue to have the trust here at these meetings as we go forward. So thanks. And thanks for driving over from Missoula.
Some of you may be thinking, geez, isn't it lunchtime? But we're just waiting a little bit longer on lunch.
I was afraid I didn't have enough because there's more people here than I was planning. So I ordered a couple pizzas that are on their way. So we're seeing to go for like another 10 minutes or just take a longer break before lunch.
Mhm.
Either way.
So yes, so those are our options. We've done really well on our agenda, and I'm guessing there's nothing that fits in 10 minutes. Okay. Or is everyone just like desperate to stand up and stretch their legs and go to the bathroom?
I'd rather leave early, so I
Okay.
update.
So if you all will bear with us, we are going to continue with Jenny giving a presentation. We are going to stop for lunch. We are going to take a break, I promise. With that said, Jenny, will you please share Montana State Library updates?
Sure. Thanks, Jody. A few things that I wanted to share with you. The first is talking more about the cost share formula, the idea of a single cost share formula idea, and continuing to move that work forward. You'll recall at the November meeting that the feedback that we heard was that people generally understand the need for a single cost share formula and a more modern cost share formula that better aligns to the costs and how libraries are using the services. But there was concern about how libraries talk about increasing costs for some of those libraries when they're not really getting more services. And so we wanted to take some time and put together some resources that libraries could use, talking points and otherwise, to talk to their boards about what a single cost share formula might mean and the benefits that libraries receive from these statewide services. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, and I'm hoping maybe someone can put it in the chat. Collet and staff put together just a fantastic video about the history of resource sharing in Montana that I think does a fantastic job of defining and identifying and articulating what resource sharing is and the benefits that come from that. I hope that, coupled with additional talking points, will be helpful to libraries as we continue to talk about this cost share formula. So my next steps are to put those resources in the hands of librarians and get your feedback on whether or not that seems sufficient. We also have our federation meetings coming up, starting with the Broad Valleys Federation at the end of this week and going through the early part of May. And we plan to continue to talk about a single cost share formula at those meetings. And we'll bring that feedback back to this group probably at your May meeting. So that's where that topic stands. I wanted to make mention of some commission related topics. At the February commission meeting, and I really applaud Peggy and all the other commissioners, they had, it was about a 7-8 hour meeting. And the majority of that meeting, about 6 hours, was a work session where they had the opportunity to really learn more about the various programs of the state library, our current priorities, and what our resource needs are going into the legislative session. We are in the process now, you've heard me talk about it before, called the executive planning process. And by June 6th, we need to submit our budget priorities to the governor's office for the 2025 legislative session. So the work session was intended to help the commissioners better understand the programs and the resources necessary to help continue to support those programs. And Kara and Amy and others did a really great job of talking about what resource sharing is. I wish we had it on camera because Kara did such an amazing job of talking about resource sharing from the patron's perspective, what it looks like for a patron of a library that's in the shared catalog, that's in a partner sharing group, that's on the courier, and the ease through which that patron can get the items they want versus those libraries that don't have the ability to be a part of those programs. And then demonstrated the cost value of being a part of the courier versus traditional ILL. It is, you can hear her in the recording of the commission work session. You can't see it. And even if you can't see it, I encourage you to listen to it because it was just truly fantastic. It just makes the case so well, I think, for what resource sharing looks like from the patron's perspective. At the April commission meeting, we'll be having a fuller conversation about how these needs translate into our legislative requests. And we've heard support from the Montana Library Association and the Trust for our resource sharing ask. I think the focus of what I'm planning for the agenda for the commission meeting in April is more feedback from the stakeholders of these services rather than just our staff talking about their importance. I think the commission heard a lot and we have that information available to them and it's recorded about what the services are and what the needs are. I think the commission really needs to hear why those services matter. And so I'm going to be asking for people who benefit from those services to be available to talk to the commission at their April meeting. That meeting is going to be April 17th, the Wednesday of the Library Association Conference down in Butte. So if you will be at the conference by Wednesday and have the opportunity to attend, I really encourage it. And I know we're going to be talking about our legislative agenda a little bit later in this agenda, so I don't want to go too deep into those topics just yet. We'll have a chance for a richer conversation after lunch. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the commission will have another conversations with commission at the Library Association conference. It's the last 90 minutes of the schedule on Thursday afternoon before going into, I believe, just following that is the happy hour that the trust is hosting. So look for those two opportunities back to back at the Library Association conference. And then just some staffing updates and announcements. Bobby, welcome to your first NAC meeting in the role of our lifelong learning librarian. Bobby's obviously very familiar with all of us, but this is a really new, exciting opportunity for her and for us having her in this role. We're really glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be in this role and thank you.
Thanks. And then I wanted to say a very best wishes to Pam Henley, who is retiring on, I think her last name is going to be March 22nd. So that's very rapidly approaching. Pam has been with us for over 10 years now, and many of you know her in her role of statewide consulting librarian and the fantastic work that she's done to support our federations and our Excellent Library Services Award and other services that she's provided to all of you in the state library. So Pam, thank you and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to mention that I did put the link to the resource sharing video in the chat, but I can only send it to Genevieve. So hopefully she can share it with you later on. But
oh, good. Thanks so much,
that's why I
Pam.
have my hand raised for that. But thank you very much. Yes, next Friday is my final day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are in recruitment for both Bobby's former position, the Montana Library Network support position, as well as the statewide consulting librarian position. Those are the updates that I had for you. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, Genevieve, what's our plan here?
Why don't we play the video if we can? Can we? What I was going to say is we can play the video and people can kind of maybe come and go. if they need to stand, take a break, get something to drink while we're waiting for
If
lunch.
Kara needs to not hear her own voice, she can vacate the premises.
Oh, okay.
The video would have sound just
They have-
on this system.
Mhm.
The sound's not gonna.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, I mean, there's some great pictures there.
There's a.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna go ahead and pause recording.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NAC meeting. We skipped around on our agenda a little, so to make sure we cover everything, we are going back up the page to preliminary FY 2025 budget priorities discussion. Kara?
Okay, Tracy will correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think that we are building off of our earlier discussion about the library development plan and the goals that we are currently working on, things we haven't started yet, things that we have deferred for various reasons. We'd like your input on priorities for this next fiscal year. The end.
Do all the things.
Yeah, usually when you guys ask us to prioritize, there's like a list for us to look at. Do you see, like, obviously there were, when we were looking at the LSTA spreadsheet, there's plenty of things on there to be done in fiscal year 25. I feel like we've had new stuff added to your plates in other conversations today.
So I do have a couple of asks for this one. And that is the first one that I will be asking you for is the Ready to Read Rendezvous, a face-to-face training. We like to do that every other year and we're due. It's a really powerful way to get library staff to come and learn about how to infuse early literacy skill building and how to help kids in that arena. And I know Amelia has done this in the past and Bobby as a trainer herself will probably do this too, is we ask the people who attend to set small, modest, but smart goals about how they're going to do this work, either a new partner or who they want to reach, or even just a changing of their procedure or process so that they build those early literacy skills. And so that is anywhere from 10 to 15,000. So it's kind of a modest ask. And then the other request that comes from consulting and continuing education, and this is related to the item about helping libraries with their public library standards. I did an analysis of which standards had the most deferral request. So a deferral request is, of course, the library cannot meet the standard. And the top two were actually the library having a written plan and the board receiving the 3 hours of continuing education. So we had 9 libraries that do not have a written plan and 8 libraries that were not able to meet the library board standard. And so we would like to propose that next year's trustee workshops be strategic planning and that we have 2 of them. And we're estimating about $10,000 based on past strategic planning workshops that we've held. And so those would also be face-to-face. We have a couple of purposes for that, actually. It is to bring trustees and library directors together because we notice like really cool stuff happens when you bring them together. And then also strategic planning kind of lends itself more to that format than just online only, although of course we'll continue to support that too. So those are the 2 kind of different asks I have. The other really tricky piece to this is the work that Suzanne has been doing with Kate McMahon from Applied Communications on developing digital opportunities plan. I mean, there's literally millions of federal dollars out there. We're not really sure what format that's going to come in. and how libraries might benefit from it. So I don't have an ask right now, but I will share with you, we hope to bring back themes of what libraries are seeing in their communities in terms of what they need and ways libraries can help. And I could see that being some kind of collaborative request, but probably if there were any way possible to use the federal funds from the Digital Equity Act, that's how I would probably approach that. So I don't have a dollar amount on that. That's just kind of out there, and I think a priority for, I guess I'd like to know, is that a priority for the NAC to try and address those needs? So that comes in the form of digital skills, which I think is a natural for libraries. It also includes access to devices. It includes helping people get access to the internet, those kinds of things, kind of typical things libraries have been doing in the realm of digital literacy for quite some time. So I guess I just want to know if that continues to be a priority for you.
So some of that seems like it's new. So I feel like you guys are already busy. So what's gonna drop off?
That's a great question. I mean, that's something you can certainly think about doing. You know, I'm certainly open to that discussion in terms of priorities. I don't, what would help you make that decision?
Well, I guess, like, do staff feel like there's anything that is not being as effective or they're having trouble with, or, because you're coming to us with these as like, we want to do these. So I guess it would be helpful for me to know, is there anything that you feel like isn't working or is toward the bottom of what you're seeing a need for?
Well, what I would share is the Ready to Read Rendezvous is pretty well established. And the trustee workshops for strategic planning, that is, we have the capacity for that. We have done face-to-face workshops. That is not us. The reason it's 10K is because we would be hiring someone to do those for us. So our job would be a fairly small lift, just finding the places and registration and so forth. The digital literacy, digital skills stuff is a very heavy lift. And I think probably the answer to that question is somewhat seeing what happens with the consulting librarian positions, you know, in terms of the skill sets we get and how that works out as well. So,
And those federal funds that we could get from the Digital Equity Act, can libraries individually work towards that? Or is that something that would have to be done by the state, managed by the state?
um, both actually, they could definitely work towards it. And the thing, and I don't know if Suzanne's still online, but I know she and I have talked.
Rejoining right now.
Cool. The federal grants can be a heavy lift for libraries. If you've never done one, they are kind of a heavy lift. So we had thought about some kind of approach with like digital navigators, because that seemed to be an interest of libraries. So the grant would have the staff included and do some kind of regional thing with digital skill building and digital navigators.
And just curious about the digital navigators, is that like interacting directly with library patron kind of end user, or is that more training library staff to then do that?
I'd probably defer to Suzanne, but I believe we thought of it as interacting with library patrons, but probably a little bit of both. But
They generally are more interacting with library patrons.
So Digital Equity Act, whatever amount of resources we put towards that is basically putting a strain on the staff that would be tasked with that, because the funding ultimately could come from federal funding, which then trickles down to all the libraries. I mean, that seems like it has a huge opportunity for return, which is what would potentially make the extra workload worthwhile.
I would think if we received a significant amount of federal funding to do this work, we would want to hire some contract or term staff to manage that work rather than trying to find the capacity within our existing staff.
And what were the years on that funding? It's unknown still, or it would be starting in FY 25?
I don't have Suzanne's handy little timeline. It's supposed to be that the initial notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, comes out in spring of this year, but I know it's a multi-year. Do you remember, Jenny? Or Suzanne, do you have it off the top of your head?
I mean, I think you're right as far as starting in 2025, but a lot of it will depend on the NOFO, but I think it looked to me last time I looked at it that they're looking like at grants for each year of it. It's a 5-year program, and it looks like they might be separate per year, but it's all pretty vague until we get the specifics.
Well, we do have a couple in the LSTA plan. We do address digital stuff already. So kind of just folding that in. Is that what you're imagining?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's not new. I think probably the heavy lift is at the beginning. Like Jenny said, the wisest course of action is to include staff, just like we did with BTOP. And I think it would work very similar to that. It is a pretty significant piece, and so I wanted to throw it out there, even though I don't have any funding or, I can't really tell you exactly what's going to be involved. In a survey of the, I think it was primarily public and tribal college libraries, we had about 65 out of 82 of the main public libraries respond. And the first thing they wanted was help with a digital opportunity plan. And the second thing was digital skill was the hotspots, which we technically did. And then the third was the digital skills and actually helping with accessibility of websites as well. And so I guess my thinking is with that kind of information, because that's a significant percentage of the public libraries that are responding, that whatever we decide to go for with the federal funding should fall in that digital skills accessibility. But I would definitely want to check with libraries before we pursued it.
The Ready to Read rendezvous, the timing for that is great if we are trying to show legislatures the work we're doing towards early literacy. So that seems like a great tie-in there. When you were talking about the trustee workshops, I was thinking about that additional money that the federations are getting and whether some of this is better done by the federations than the state library, and but the federations might need the state library to help actually put it all together. So, but that funding could go towards the hiring of the presenters. Then you, instead of 2 trustee workshops, you'd be having 6, I guess. How they spend that money. I appreciate that that's up to the federations. Okay, so Tracy and Kara, what can we be helpful with right now in terms of comments, questions, and feedback?
I don't think that we have our LSTA award amount yet, do we? No.
Yeah, that was the piece I was going to chime in on. So as you all know, the federal government is continuing to operate under a continuing resolution, which means that our federal funding is level until they tell us one way or another, until they decide on the FY24 budget. If you saw the news, Biden came out with his FY25 budget today. So at some point, maybe we'll get an FY24 budget. I'd be shocked if there was any new money in it. I also don't think anybody's anticipating a cut to funding. So likely our budget is level funding, which means that we would have essentially the same amount of funding, but we don't have that appropriation at this point.
And how about our efforts last legislative session for the funding for the hotspots and Courier and Montana Library to Go? Do we pick up any of those threads in the FY25 budget?
I don't think we have the funding to sufficiently address any of those. That's what the legislation that we're hoping to support next session will address. There is one item that I should mention because, well, depending on what our funding looks like, it may be in a proposed LSTA budget, but the Shared Catalog Partners Sharing Group wants to pursue a pilot for collaborative collection development, which would be run out of Great Falls Public Library as the recipient of pre-processed titles that would then belong to the partners and help to, well, should help to address a holds backlog and try to honor the 5-to-1 holds ratio for best-selling fiction adult titles. And so we would like to pilot that at an estimated $20,000.
So to be clear, just to reiterate, the Ready to Read Rendezvous and the fall workshops, the trustee workshops are largely within our normal operating parameters. The digital literacy would be new, but I think the ask is really that we get input and support from the NAC for federal funding through the Digital Opportunity Plan and the Federal Digital Equity Act. And that what's really new on this list is the Shared Catalog Cooperative Collection Development Pilot Program. And that be prioritized. The next steps, depending on the NAC's position on these matters, would be that these items would then be included in our library development budget that includes our federal as well as our coal tax funding that goes to the commission. And we take our budget to the commission at their June commission meeting.
And just because I asked before about how much extra work that would be for staff, Kara has already done a lot of work on the MSC pilot program, and we have a lot of players that are willing to step up and help with that. So I don't think it's going to be a gigantic lift, but so that money is just going to go to buy materials, and we have already kind of developed a way that is going to work. So it'll be a little more work for the MSC, a little work for Great Falls Public, and a little work for Kara, but hopefully not a huge lift.
I was thinking back to the question of like, what would be helpful for us. And I think probably just knowing if there's any needs out there that we should be considering when we come to you with our budget requests. So I've asked Jody if she would just pull up last year's snack. I meant to do that and see what kind of, how much funding we have to play with. Because that'd probably be helpful for you as well.
March.
February 1st?
Yep, February meeting. You're right.
The memo or the?
I think it's the funding priorities. Okay, let's take a look. No, I think it's the memo. You're right.
Are you just looking for the total award, Tracy?
No, I was actually looking for, well, I mean, absolutely, the NAC has the right to look at the total award, but then that means staff reductions. So, I'm operating under the assumption that's not what you mean, and so I'm looking for the dollar amount that's project-based.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be.
Would it have been on the, no. not development plan.
Look at the funding priorities.
This exercise?
Oh, let me actually go to the funding priorities so much just really
This one?
quickly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then if you scroll down, maybe that's.
Sorry, folks, we're doing some digging. Oh,
There we go. So it looks like we came to you with about $200,000 in requests, but I don't believe, I want to say it was more like we had about 60 to 100,000. Do you remember, Jenny?
Yeah, off that 200,000, there's the 81,000 that was prioritized for the history portal. So that's now in our ongoing rather than project expense category.
Okay, so we're looking at about 100,000 then.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you need anything, Jen?
I'm actually holding status quo this next year because we can't take on anymore. We're at capacity.
Mhm.
There's not much else we can do. And if I ask for more money, that means I have more projects and I can't do any more projects.
And if you look at that project list from last year, there's a couple of things that I think we're planning to drop off already as well, like there's, remind me, Tracy, Reed Squared or Bobby, were we gonna get rid of the Reed Squared contract? And Amy, there's 40,000 there for shared catalog libraries that we probably won't need. There's already funding there for the fall workshop, so that translates into the trustee workshops for this year. I feel like we should probably go back and revisit this spreadsheet and bring it back to the NAC at your May meeting, which still gives us plenty of time before the commission meeting in June. And hopefully by then we actually have our award from IMLS. So we actually have a dollar amount that we're concerned with. Does that seem fair? In the meantime, I'd love to know if there is any additional reaction to some of the ideas that staff shared.
one thumbs up in the room, head nods, thumbs up. Online, any comments? Prove to us that you all came back. No pressure.
Thumbs up from Lori. And Alyssa and Jonna.
Thank you. So this item, we've done what we can do today. We'll have another version of it to look at in May. we can, we can dream that we know what our funding will be. And that, I think, leaves us with legislative priorities discussion.
I think I can kick this off and then I'll probably turn things over to Kara. So we've been talking, and as I mentioned, the commission had a work session in February where they heard us talking about our legislative agenda that includes resource sharing. This is something we talked a little bit about at your previous meeting. We've been talking with the MLA Government Affairs Committee about it. You'll recall that there is a section of code 22-1-328 that calls for us to have a resource sharing program whereby the state library administers funds appropriated by the legislature for resource sharing to support all types of libraries in Montana. And there really isn't a direct appropriation from the legislature for resource sharing. We have carved out portions of our budget over the years for the purposes of resource sharing, but there is no direct appropriation. And so we hope with the support of the commission that we'll be able to move forward a legislative ask for a resource sharing appropriation. And in support and recognition of the fact that the statute specifically calls for all types of libraries to be involved, we've been looking at what that kind of ask would look like under the definition of resource sharing, which is really all of those resources and services that are shared by all types of libraries or have the ability to be shared by all libraries in the state of Montana. So that would include things like the shared catalog, the courier, Montana Library to Go, some of these cooperative collection development programs, the Montana History Portal, which we know is an important educational online learning resource for the state, as well as other kinds of e-resources to support public, school, and academic library needs. I'm sure there's things that I'm forgetting, but having a support, actual staffs, additional staff support to support these initiatives more broadly as well. What we are looking at is what it would take for all the public libraries to participate in the shared catalog, having an actual courier that supports the entire state, not just portions of the state. Adequate collection development budget for Montana Library to Go to reduce some of the holds friction that exists there. Support for the kinds of statewide periodical databases and other resources that we had funding 4 years ago and lost, and that the academic libraries and school libraries make a lot of use of. We've had conversations, as I said, with the Montana Libraries Association Government Affairs Committee. We met last week with Pamela Benjamin to get an idea of what the trails needs look like in terms of e-resources, as well as potential funding for their own ILS, the ALMA system that those libraries rely on. Pamela is getting back to us with more information, but she did tell us that some of those libraries are having to forego some of their e-resources due to lack of funding. So this is becoming a greater need, especially amongst the academic libraries. I want to have a conversation with all of you about your opinions on where we're going with this legislative ask, and then that will be used to help further inform our conversation with the commission at the April meeting. We haven't, we don't have that kind of a full dollar amount from Pamela and the Trails system yet, but lacking some of that information, I think our ask right now, Kara, is looking about $6 million. I think strategically, we certainly want to get a better number from Pamela. I think we also want to give ourselves a little bit of negotiating room as we go into the legislative session. So if there's some things that we would need to cut back, we have some room in our ask that would allow for that. Next steps would be to, again, approach the commission in April with this ask, and then continue to work with MLA Government Affairs Committee and other stakeholders to help talk about and advocate for this ask, including the Trust for Montana Libraries. Key stakeholders would be the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education and garnering their support for some kind of ask. And then a grassroots advocacy campaign around the state to promote this kind of effort. I hope to be able to talk about it in front of our interim budget committee sometime between now and the end of the calendar year, so they're familiar with what the ask looks like going into the next legislative session. I think one of the things we've been talking about is we've been thinking about how to message this kind of ask, is how those different kinds of statewide programs build on one another, and how and Kara did such a great job of demonstrating this to the commission, how when a library has access to all of these resources, it translates into the ease of access that we see for our patrons. I think that's the kind of real messaging that we really want to focus on, and other kinds of talking points and metaphors to help convey the importance of how these kinds of programs build upon and rely on one another, and why it's important for all Montanans then to have access to these kinds of services. Kara, what would you add?
Would add that what I think we'd like to do differently from last session is to structure this request around outcomes so that it wouldn't be a bunch of different line items that they could pick apart in session, because these are all pieces that need to go together in order for it to really work as intended. And so we'll be thinking about how to present that in an outcomes-based kind of document or something that we can hand out. At MLA, State Library staff and Government Affairs, Rachel and Alyssa, and we'll be doing a session where we hope to have a good discussion with attendees, where we can get more input on how do we present this to legislators and decision makers in a way that is understandable, because resource sharing is a pretty nerdy kind of behind the scenes kind of thing that happens. And also, what concerns should we anticipate about this legislation? One of the things that was brought up was if we were to have the wonderful problem of getting $6 million and we could fully fund some of these programs, how would that affect local budgets, and how would they discuss that with their boards, and the fact that we're not trying to displace these local funds, but that they can direct those funds to do things at the local level that they're not currently able to do because they have to buy into these statewide programs. And so we'll be asking those questions at the MLA session. I'd like to know what else would you like to know from librarians, the library community, about this request? What questions do we need to be asking?
So if we're going to be sharing, like, what is going to be the request for reconsideration policy? Like, if you're part of the partners or part of the things, and there's been so much at the legislative level about parental control. I know how I would respond to that, but what is our message going to? I think we need to have a really clear message and idea about how we respond to any of those things if we ask for it legislatively.
To what extent is a partner relationship part of the value of this as you folks think about it? Is being a partner part of the deal if you're part of the shared catalog? Or does the shared statewide value decline if some libraries are partners and some libraries aren't partners?
It does, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's clear dollar and cents values. A library is going to get the biggest bang for their buck if they're in partners, if they participate in everything. I think that's, and patrons, I think that's pretty self-evident.
Not entirely self-evident, since not
Mhm.
everyone's already a partner.
The dollars and cents piece of it, I think, is pretty self-evident. One of the points I wanted to make and get your feedback on, one of the things that we do not currently have in a resource sharing ask is the hotspot program. And, you know, that's with a lot of thought at this point, but there's still time to reconsider it. When I was talking with MLA Government Affairs last week, Rachel Ron made a really interesting point. The cost that we get or that we pay for providing access to the hotspots right now, there's no advantage, there's no incentive for the state to take that cost on versus what a local library would pay. The cost is the same. And right now, local libraries are the ones that are really handling the administration of that program largely directly with the vendors. So it's not necessarily really mirroring a lot of the other statewide programs that we administer, with the exception that the legislature has appropriated the funds to the state library, these one-time only funds that we have for this biennium. And we've heard from librarians, including through the NAC, that the interest in continuing to sustain the hotspot program is not what it was at a statewide level. There are still local libraries that have good use of the hotspot program, but it's not as pervasive as we once saw. So to Kara's point about what that means, what a resource sharing asks might mean for local libraries, one example might be that with the loss of state funding for the hotspot program, for those libraries that want to sustain the hotspot program locally, they could use some of that money in their budget to continue to sustain that program. And I'm sure that there are other examples of that as well. But I wanted to hear your feedback about not continuing to pursue funding for the hotspot program.
Well, I kind of feel like a terrible terrible librarian saying this, but like we invest a ton of time in the hotspots, and we have had a very large number of them stolen. And we still have interest, but it tends to be like this same small group of people. And we only get 12 to 15 checkouts of hotspots per month. So that's a relatively small number of people that we're hitting. And like our bookmobile hotspot gets way more hits than that and is way cheaper and way easier. And so for us, we're not, like, if the state doesn't pick it up, we probably are not going to continue. But I don't know if that's the way it is for everyone, but that is the way it is in Great Falls. Is we just have had, I don't like to blame things on patrons, but it has not worked well for us. We just have had a lot of people just steal the hotspots, and then we turn them off and they never return them. And the return on investment of losing that amount of equipment consistently has really bothered me.
I echo Susie's frustrations. It just unfortunately feels like there's a group of sort of uh, not responsible patrons that take advantage of the program. I have had to completely shut all of mine off and have them return to the main branch to sort of reorganize them at least a couple times now. Every time I do that, it's a ton of work. My staff currently, I mean, we can't keep up with sort of the management of the program. I think I kept hoping that, you know, if we had access to the Verizon dashboard or access to various things, that would kind of help staff with our internal workflows to help manage them. And we just haven't found a very good way to manage them. But I know that it's important to my board, and they keep pushing me every time to sort of relaunch them, reintroduce them into circulation, and I try it because, you know, they're my bosses. But we certainly wouldn't have money in the budget to even consider offering them if the state wasn't providing them.
It's making me wonder, like, what is the memory of the legislature? Because we really advocated for that. Will they remember and be like, well, you said the most important thing were these hotspots, and
I thought,
Oh, please go ahead.
I thought we were kind of clear that we never intended this to be a program that we would sustain for years and years, that this was intended to be a bridge to ultimately, you know, we were hoping to get more federal funding to develop broadband infrastructure, and that this is just kind of a temporary substitute for that work.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that it was sort of like a Band-Aid thing, of way to introduce this technology to libraries, see if it works for them. If it does, then they sort of know what they're getting into. They can, on the local level, work to allocate funds for that if they find it works and is important for their community. And if not, then, you know, at least they had the opportunity to sort of try it before they bought it. I am wondering, though, if in terms of legislative ask, if putting the hotspots in there is one of those negotiable items. And then when they sort of talk about it, then sort of say, well, maybe if we did have to get rid of something, I guess maybe it could be these hotspots, because I don't know. I mean, is that too?
I love you.
That's how you get a movie downgraded from R to PG-13.
Yeah, yeah, but that's, you know, something that I think, and I think it could give them some insight into just the way the libraries operate and the way things do change. You know, what we're asking for this session is going to be different from what we asked for last time, and different than what we asked for in 2 years or 4 years. So I, you know, not to just put it up there as a sacrificial item intentionally, but I think if they fund it, great. And if not, then it's obvious it's not working for some live.
I think as a library, personally, for my library, in my experience, if we could get this resource sharing support, it would be more valuable than state aid has ever been. Which is no reason to get rid of state aid, and still not high enough. Come on, guys. But that's my way of saying I do think this is really important and it's worth asking. I do like the idea of asking for an amount that we are willing and able to cut and still get high value out of. And the idea of putting it all around resource sharing, I think, is great. There's got to be some way we can tie it into, you know, the state population and how they'll all benefit, and, you know, gotta show how it's worth so much money, that it would be silly not to invest in it.
So obviously being part of the partners makes it more bang for the buck. But we still have libraries that aren't part of the shared catalog and aren't part of partners. So I feel like part of this ask, not that we're not already making gigantic efforts to get people to be involved in those programs, but what are the barriers for people not being part of that? Like, can we show, if we do this thing, we will get more libraries to participate? And I don't know if that makes any sense, because
So we have heard that for many of the remaining libraries, there's 14 public libraries not on the shared catalog. And they're small enough that it is the cost, even if it would only cost them $1,500 to be on the shared catalog. That's their entire book budget for a year. So if we could get this legislative appropriation to help support and reduce the cost for libraries just to be a member, then they can benefit from sharing the system and the staff tech support and the librarian expertise, even if they then don't have the resources to, join partners. So that, I think, covering the cost of the shared catalog for Montana Library to Go is one of the barriers, is just that cost.
Do we know what the total cost for those 14 libraries would be to join partners? Because then if we could just include that amount, if we just say that's $100,000, and this would remove any financial barrier for any library that's not an MSC, sorry, not partners, MSC, that would remove any financial barrier from any library, not an MSC, if they join in the next whatever years. And then if they don't, then it's just fundamentally obvious that it's a matter of their personal local control and preference, governance, whatever. And there's sort of no excuses other than their own philosophy. And it might just be in their best interest. I don't mean to it's not a judgment thing necessarily. It's just saying that there is really no barrier other than their own willingness to join.
We do have that amount. I don't have it off the top of my head, but we also, part of our contract with Cersei Dynex is based on, it's based on circulation, not on number of libraries. So if we could cover the cost of our contract with our ILS vendor, it would actually open it up to both those publics and any schools or specials who wanted to join as well until we hit the circulation number. And then Cersei would start charging us more, but we do have a fair bit of wiggle room in that contract that we have. So we can argue it both ways. Like, here's a cost for those 14, but also covering the shared catalog as a whole would open it up to libraries. And I think there's a benefit when like a school library and a public library in the same city are on the same system, because your kids learn how to use the online card catalog at school. They can use it at the public library. You can have more of that cross.
Coley had a chat from Coley that said that tomorrow's MSL Learn webinar is titled Partners, Sharing Groups, Collections, Processes, Possibilities from 10 to 10:30. And she noted it was shared catalog specific.
And do we know what the barriers are for people joining the partners? What, could you use your mic, please, sir?
Pride.
It's transportation costs mostly.
I would also share, I think it's not even just transportation costs, Amy, but like total lack of any reliable way to move the materials. Because I've been working with libraries in Pathfinder who are super excited that Great Falls is on partners. And there's not a real good mechanism for them to get the books back and forth, the materials back and forth. And then the other thing I would say is there are some libraries who, whether it's the library board or a larger community, the concern of just the sharing local materials in a much wider way, because of course when you join partners you really open up your collection to go out the doors. So there's a philosophy barrier there too.
I would echo that, Tracy, and I think this is an example of how these services can build together, because if you add in the collection development piece, then maybe that barrier goes away because they have access to those new resources.
And Jonna?
I just kind of wanted to echo a little bit of that sentiment with regarding libraries that can't afford to be on the shared catalog. Our local school, that's, half a block away from me, Daniels County, who's the county next door to me, they're not on the shared catalog. And I think in some way, that's not great because there's a certain isolation in that as well. If Daniels County wants book that they don't have, they pick up the phone, they call us, we jimmy our own kind of little ILL process, and we kind of do our own little thing. But if they were part of the catalog, then they would have all that access to everybody else. So they kind of sit there isolated, and our school is the same way. And I don't think that that's really useful, especially up in our area geographically, where isolation is what it is anyway. I mean, we're generally pretty isolated anyhow. As far as like the partners and the sharing groups, that's kind of the same thing. We're kind of isolated up here. Although, if we could have like a mini little sharing group up here, because we all interlibrary alone with each other fairly frequently, I'm sure that might be a possibility, or being open up to that kind of a discussion or idea.
Carly?
Carly, she also has a written comment. Carly, I'll read your written one, but if you want to jump in, you can. For MSC partner barriers like Four Rivers, wait, let me make sure someone. Unless you are in or near a hub, it is the library staff in their personal cars driving the distances to drop off, pick up, because we're even having trouble recruiting businesses and volunteers to run books. This is yet another big ask for library staff. Thank you.
Mark?
A few different things, I guess, now that I, heard. I mean, this is definitely very kind of tangential, but Carly's comment made me think about it. I wonder if there'd be any money to reimburse library employees for personal travel of moving transportation materials, since it's kind of very clear that, the existing courier and kind of companies that do that aren't really able to meet the needs in some of those more rural areas. But if it was something that people, I know the liability and the kind of everything else would be probably an absolute nightmare, but it's just a shame that there's, that barrier that's going to be pretty hard to overcome. My other thought was hearing Jana talk about the sort of isolation of those different libraries and the ones that aren't on MSC. Because I do think there's a really kind of compelling interest in getting as many libraries on MSC as possible. If there's only 14 publics that aren't, this legislative session does seem like a great opportunity to say, look, we're going to fund it if they want to join. The money's there to do that. And not to get too far into the kind of the advocacy and marketing and language around it, but that's one thing I really enjoy. And I think almost kind of pitching it to the legislature in a way they might be able to resonate with is it's like, with law enforcement or other, fire, those sort of things, all the agencies are talking on the same frequency on the radio. Mm-hmm. Not all our libraries are on the same frequency. And that creates a lot of or not a lot, but, it creates inefficiencies and other issues that I think could very well be solved by giving the opportunity for those libraries to get on board, have us all on the same frequency, using the same catalog. And then that would allow, any money that's spent on MSC to benefit more libraries and for that to sort of snowball and go from there.
And I don't know, I'm thinking about the two smaller libraries in Cascade County and the possibility, I don't want to speak for them, but that it's not just the financial cost of getting on the MSC, but the amount of work that it would take to do that. And I don't know if there's anything in our ask where we can dedicate staff time to say, we're going to send people out to help you get, rebarcode your stuff because you don't have proper barcodes or you don't have whatever. But I when you're in a tiny library and you're one person, the thought of redoing your whole system, I mean, that's overwhelming. I mean, it was a huge lift for Great Falls Public to join the MSC, and we had a lot of staff and a lot of volunteers and things to get stuff changed. So I think that psychological and just staff effort barrier is real.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I think, yes, we absolutely need to account for that in some of the costs and the funding that we're asking for. We're never going to get into the weeds of that in front of the legislature. We don't need to, but internally, we need to know exactly what those kinds of costs are. And I'm sure, you know, we could hire contractors to handle that kind of need. You know, your point that bringing on 14 libraries, who are some of the smallest in the state, is a lift. We have accounted for the cost of just adding probably at least one more system administrator to the shared catalog. But there's definitely some upfront costs to bringing those libraries on. Lori?
Yeah, I liked that idea with the courier services. Bill in Sheridan, his library board approved him to get mileage to transfer the books between Ennis and Twin Bridges. He doesn't go to Whitehall, but he will do Ennis to Twin Bridges. And then if we have extra funding from our federations, are we allowed, would that be something that we could do where we could pool that money into a pot, and those employees that have to run courier books could potentially ask for mileage in that?
I think the answer to your question, Lori, is it depends so in terms of the Federation dollars themselves, the resource sharing is a program federations have always traditionally had. And so the base funding, I think that it could probably use for that purpose because it would be supporting resource sharing. The additional 4,000 per each federation, you know, I think that is going to be up for discussion in your plan of service. And you could certainly ask for that, but you may want to have a plan B for just trustee development if the commission should feel like that's a better use of that extra 4K. But in terms of the base itself that your federation receives, I don't see why that wouldn't be allowable under resource sharing.
One thing that's been running through the back of my head during these conversations is some of the struggles we've had recently with the concept of local control, and there should be local control, and that should be a local decision. And so, like, how do we promote resource sharing without getting that as a pushback?
Well, it's the infrastructure that allows you to focus more
Right.
on local needs and
So
to
we need to focus
shift
this.
your local budget.
It's not telling them how they fund their libraries or what their policies are in individual libraries. It's giving access. I loved Jonna's use of the concept of removing isolation. That I feel like that could speak to a legislator in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I would say, to address that sort of concern, it's like, there's the Montana Department of Transportation, there's, state highways, but there's also county, state, local roads. So it's just sort of, they all feed together to make things work better. Having a state highway run through your county doesn't take away local control of how you plow, tertiary roads. It's just, kind of part of the way things work.
I was trying to find the state's budget for the statewide public safety radio program. I couldn't quickly find it, but it's millions of dollars. I know for sure.
All right, anything else on the legislative priorities discussion piece?
We don't actually have any pieces of legislation to carry this year, so that feels good. We got a lot of good work done in the last legislative session. So funding, it's the funding request.
Okay, this is not an agenda item, but I think we should discuss our next meeting. that is set for Wednesday, May 1st, and we intend this to be our retreat, I believe, which means it's a little more involved than a typical meeting. Is there any discussion we need to have about what we're trying to accomplish at this year's retreat? Who's going to lead that discussion?
Can I start with just a few logistics questions?
I love logistics.
Ease into it. Looking to have it like in a room like this, try to get a room in the Capitol again, or are we looking for something special? Oh, yeah.
We will be meeting at the Lewis and Clark Library.
And that is more of an that's a 9 to 5. So let me know if you're looking for 2 hotel nights. So maybe those of you who are here before you leave, you can let me know your hotel needs, and those online, if you'll just chat them to me. So I know what hotel needs everyone has if we are meeting 9 to 5 in Helena.
In the previous retreats, I think we've tried to gather for an evening meal the night before. Heads nodding.
Yeah, so just let me know if you need that second night. If getting it done at 5 is a little too late to get home. Thanks.
I think we should probably have just a short business meeting at the start to wrap up a LD budget priorities, and then any follow-up on the roadmap review and the cost share formula, any feedback that we hear this spring on the cost share formula.
The day before the May NAC meeting, library development staff will be meeting also at the Lewis and Clark Library in the very same room to go over our evaluation of our library development plan, and then we will have evaluation metrics to share with you at your May meeting, and we are hoping that we'll be able to get a recommendation on an FY25 library development plan.
It just occurred to me, something that hasn't come up at all today is the phrase core service committee, which I know we moved away from, and what were we calling them? Like core service conversations. I just was thinking, like, how do we still have, like, in our governing documents, are we referencing core service committees in a way that needs to be cleaned up?
When I've asked staff for updates about this, the idea about the conversations, I think our planning for the session at MLA was intended to be a core services conversation around resource sharing with that structure.
Is there a list?
Yeah. Mhm.
Perhaps piggybacking on the evaluation metrics for the LD plan, I'm also hoping to borrow your expertise and do some brainstorming activities regarding our research agenda at the State Library and get some feedback on that.
Carly.
I think I might need to read Carlos. I'm sorry I missed this. What is the update to the changes to the share cost formula from the last meeting?
Oh, the single cost share formula?
We are going to be sharing a video and talking points with librarians. The ask from the last meeting was that libraries have more resources to talk to their boards about the impact of changes to the cost share formula. So we've put those together and we'll be sharing those out with libraries, and then also talking about it at the upcoming Federation meetings, and then bringing the feedback that we hear back to the next meeting of the Network Advisory Council.
I'm just kind of curious. I wonder how the increase in cost that some libraries might see with this share formula and how the cost share formula overall interfaces with the legislative ask. And if it's sort of almost one of those like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but kind of in a positive direction of, well, the state's footing your MSC bill. So, you know, even though it's going up, I know I'm not being very articulate with how I'm explaining that, but I'm just wondering how those two things, kind of interact with each other, if at all.
Were we to be wildly successful in our legislative ask, there wouldn't be a need for a cost share formula.
Good to know. That's a great talking point and thing to have.
Which is, I mean, that does save all of us a considerable amount of time and money, just in the actual administration of the invoicing and all of that, so.
Correlate message, the Montana Library Association Conference, April 18th, 11:15, 12:15, resource sharing in Montana, yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Okay, taking us back to discussing the retreat. Who at this table is responsible for figuring out what we're gonna do at the retreat? Tracy and Kara have previously worn these hats.
So maybe it would be helpful. I mean, I think you probably have a full day here. So business meeting wise, we have the budget, we have a possible roadmap update and a possible cost share formula update. And then retreat, we have recommendations basically for creating a fiscal year 25 LD plan and the evaluation, which I think Karen and I haven't had a chance to meet and plan this all out, but LD staff will be looking at evaluation metrics for the FY 24 LD plan. And so I think it would be really helpful to have that higher level that you would provide of the evaluation of the different projects. So that would be a piece of it. And I would assume that that information would then inform the FY 25 plan and would in fact be like, we're looking now at year 2 of the LSTA plan. And then Rebecca would lead the brainstorm, the research agenda topic. And then why am I not surprised that Jody's suggesting you might want to do some bylaws changes, but that would be a business meeting thing, but that would also be a piece of it.
I'm sorry, I'm just such a stickler for words and how we use them and how we say we do things matching how we actually do things. So then maybe that's what we do on the retreat. We just take a deep dive on some things that require some more in-depth conversations. At this point in time, I would like to ask for public comment on any matter not contained in this agenda that is within the jurisdiction of the Network Advisory Council.
Good job, Jody, always leading us through the agenda. I appreciate all the work it takes to run a meeting like this.
Thank you. And hopefully I will be reappointed to the Network Advisory Council by the commission at their meeting in April. Aaron and Jonna and I are all up for reappointment and all very much wanting to be reappointed. So Peggy, if you can just make sure that gets taken care of. Any further comment from folks online? Any other business and announcements?
Carly just said, thank you all, safe travels, and have a wonderful spring.
Thank you, Carly. We really appreciate that you join us in these meetings and comment. All right, I would like to adjourn this meeting 46 minutes ahead of our anticipated end time. Yay, thank you, everybody.